on lessons learned during the 2022 cycle on voter education and outreach from election officials, particularly on social media, but also beyond. Our panels include an analysis of trust-building practices used by election officials in 2022, a discussion with select officials about their experiences using social media and other modes for voter outreach, and a spotlight on resources available for election officials to develop, share, and learn from one another's communication practices. This work would not be possible with the funding and support from the MIT Election Data Science Lab, and special thank you to Charles Stewart for supporting our work, for being here today. Also for Claire Desoy, who made this magic happen. Thank you so much. Our research assistants, some of whom are on the call today, Tyler Daniel, Mary Catherine McCreary, Lauren Harris, Emma Piles, Lauren Brady. They're here on the call today. We thank them for their work. Of course, election officials as well. Without you, this would not be possible. Thank you for helping us through the process, for giving us your insights and your feedback. We really appreciate it. And last but not least, we thank our partners in the election information ecosystem for giving us your feedback, for supporting our work, for exchanging ideas and knowledge. Without you, this would not be possible. So just an overview of what to expect today. Our first session is from Team Voter Education, myself, Leah Mary Vaki from Mississippi State University, and my partner and friend, Mara Sadman-Lee from Connecticut College. We are Team Voter Edu, and we're going to be taking care of the first panel. And then after a quick break, we will switch to a roundtable discussion with a few election officials that we would love to highlight the work they're doing to educate voters. Julie Wise from King County, Washington, Dustin Charney from Onondaga County, New York, Brianna Lennon from Boone County, Missouri, Jeffrey Danovich, Clayton County, Georgia, and Lori Edwards, Polk County, Florida. And then after another quick break, our last session, moderated by Charles Stewart, will showcase partners in the election ecosystem that work with election officials: Austin Borrell from the Civic Roundtable, Avery Davis Roberts from the Carter Center, Steve Wanchek, Protect Our Election, and Omar Parbo from Ideas 42. I will turn it to Mara, who's going to kick our presentation off.
Thank you so much, Leah. And I'm assuming everyone can hear me okay. If that changes, just let me know. We're so grateful to have, again, we're so grateful to have everyone here, and we're really excited about the information that we're going to share with you about our own work and our findings. And we're also really excited for the conversations that are to come. So we thought that we would start by giving a little bit of background about why we care about this work so much, and why voter education has become such an important part of our own research. And we thought it would be helpful to start by highlighting the values that inform our work. We really think a lot about, when we're looking at the voter education information ecosystem, we really think a lot about how the information that is put out there by election officials, how these can support voter access, transparency about election processes, and integrity, and the presentation of integrity in the election, in the electoral system. And so these are the values that really undergird and motivate our work. And I'm sure that they're values that are similar to many of the election officials on this call. We really come at this from the position that the right to be informed, the right to have access, easy access, equitable access to the information about how to register to vote, how to cast a ballot that counts, is a human right. And we know that election officials feel similarly about educating their voters. And the research that we've done over the last couple of years has offered some really hopeful and promising findings about the value of this work to voters. Voters benefit. So if you're an election official on the call, please know that even if it doesn't feel like it, what you do matters. It matters in sort of the aggregate sense in the research that we're doing, but we know that it matters so much to voters. Of course, we're all navigating these disruptions to the information ecosystem that have undermined confidence in election integrity in recent years. And so we're really trying with this Building Trust webinar and with this research to understand what can be done to preserve and rebuild and cultivate trust in the American electoral process. So it's really important to think about some of the trends that have been highlighting our work, and we wanted to share those with you so you get a sense about, aside from our own values, different developments that have pushed us forward in this research. We've noted, along with other scholars, some declines in voter confidence. Of course, as we've noted here, there's going to be differences in the confidence that folks feel in ballot counting, that their vote was counted compared to votes across the country or votes across their state. But of course, we are very much aware of declines in voter confidence, and especially the partisan split that we've seen in confidence in ballot counting and confidence in election administration. At the same time, we know that the public trusts their local election officials. A major shout out to the Reed College folks who conduct their local election official survey and who have also conducted surveys on public perceptions of election officials. We do know that the public looks to you and tends to have higher levels of trust in you, relative to other government officials. So this is a really important trend that we want to sort of highlight and understand. At the same time, especially given the uptick in folks who are running for statewide office, who are election deniers, we are seeing some evidence of distrust in state election officials. And then finally, a pattern that all of you are, I'm certain, quite aware of, who are election officials on this call. We see this mass exodus of election officials and workers due to harassment, intimidation, and lack of resources. So these are some of the things that we have been keeping an eye on as we have moved forward with this research. So responses to these trends that we've seen and that we are also trying to be a part of are investments in voter education. Voter education is not a new phenomenon, of course. I think the 2000 presidential elections and the Help America Vote Act really sort of threw us into this new era of voters needing to know the intricacies of how to mark a ballot and how to cast a ballot. But this is something that we have seen an uptick in recent years, and we are trying to gather and get a sense of all of the information that voters need to have in order to cast a ballot, in order to register and to cast a ballot that counts. They need to know who their election official is, how to register, how to cast a ballot, how to actually mark that ballot, what rights they have. Information about how ballots are processed can help them be more confident that their vote is counted. And then, of course, information about how election results are verified and certified have become increasingly important. So we've also seen, as a part of this investment in voter education, trust building campaigns. Since 2019, the bells have been ringing. Election officials are your trusted sources of election information. And we are now starting to be able to assess the impact of some of these campaigns, which we're going to be talking about here in just a little bit. Of course, we're also seeing a response to these trends through the combating of mis and disinformation. And we've observed a number of different kinds of strategies. We've talked to folks about their strategies and efforts to both inoculate, sort of protect voters from misinformation, but also debunk, respond to misinformation. And so these are other trends that we have been noting in the work that we have been doing. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Leah, who's going to give us some more specifics on just precisely the research that we've done over the last year and how we've collected our information and some top line findings. So Leah, you can go ahead.
Thank you, Maura. How did election officials build trust in 2022? Of course, it's not one cycle. This is a long-term process. We would like to walk you through our research for the last couple of years. For 2022, with the gracious support from MIT, we partnered with the National Conference of Citizenship, and we used their platform, Junkipedia, to track and code social media content shared by election officials, both state and locals, during the 2022 cycle, particularly the last 3 months of the cycle. We have collected over 50,000 organic posts, meaning not paid advertisements, from 123 state election official accounts and over 1,000 local election official accounts on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Because of capacity challenges, we're not able to track everything, but this is a good start. We applied a taxonomy of 7 thematic categories, and I will show them later, which we have been developing since 2020 to capture some of the core processes and items discussed on social media by election officials. So this is an example of our taxonomy, and thanks to the Center for Civic Design for brainstorming with us, particularly on figuring out what is the best way to capture the type of messages sent on social media by election officials, information about deadlines, how to access and track absentee ballots, how to register to vote, who to reach out if you have issues, what to expect on election day, when to expect election results, flags about misinformation, specific terms used, particularly with respect to trust, like the Trusted Info campaign that we have been tracking, accessibility, multiple languages, the ability to click on a link so that you can access information, and across platforms, the challenges of that, specific themes about how to register to vote, when to vote, how to find your polling place. We try to capture all of these with specific tags, and that's how we coded every social media post. So this is an overview of the volume. So this project allows us to not only code content, but also track patterns in social media over time. This is the state election officials communications volume from September 19th, before the National Voter Registration Day, to November 15th, usually when most of the states have already certified their the election results. And what is visible from this trend is the spikes over time, especially around critical events like voter registration deadlines, early voting deadlines, and closer to election day, of course. And a clear pattern is the preference from state election officials to use Twitter over Facebook, and of course, Instagram is lagging. And then if we switch to the local election officials' communications during the same time period, something that you will notice is similar patterns, fluctuations over time around important deadlines, and also a preference to use Facebook, whereas with state election officials, the preference was to use Twitter. But again, Facebook, Twitter are, at least in 2022, we know things are changing, the preferred methods to communicate with voters on social media, with Instagram lagging. And we know some are using TikTok and LinkedIn, and it is our intention to incorporate those platforms moving forward. The strategies were identified by coding content, but also talking to other partners in the election ecosystem, and of course, election officials themselves. And we thematically categorize them into three. Trust the source. Election officials are trusted messengers. You should look to them for reliable information. Trust the system. Election procedures are safe, they're secure, they're accurate. Those are terms explicitly used by election officials themselves. Last but not least, trust the people. Election officials are professionals. They know what they're doing, they're experienced. Election officials and election workers are your friends and neighbors, they're part of your community. So here's some examples of how these messages were communicated. Of course, we cannot showcase everything, but these are some illustrative examples, communicating trust and highlighting those processes. On the left-hand side, from the source, trust the source, facts. So those are terms that we are looking for and we're seeing from election officials. On the right-hand side, explicit mention of the word trust in capital letters. This was incorporated by Polk County in every social media post. Visit our website for trusted source of election information to communicate information about how to vote and using your ID rather than just trust your source. So combining all those messages, but making sure that the signals are there, particularly with respect to the source. Trust the source, meaning the election officials themselves. The next slide is an example of the process, trust the process. States and localities have been using different ways to communicate the same message. On the left-hand side is a flyer produced by the Illinois State Board of Elections. Several local election officials were sharing that content. The process before election day, it is secure. Here is what election officials are doing to make sure what voters will experience on election day, and their votes will be counted accurately. The process works. On the right-hand side from Oregon, did you know elections are secure? There's no voter fraud. There are mechanisms in place, procedures in place to keep elections secure. So we consider that as a useful example of a trust the source strategy. Of course, election officials handle misinformation. They are aware that it exists. They take steps to prepare for it. They use different strategies. They are proactive. They make sure that they inform voters. They train them on how to spot misinformation, what to do when they are exposed to it. They try to inoculate voters against misinformation, but things are happening in real time as well. So they make sure to respond in real time. These are some examples of explicitly responding to misinformation. This is not what our office is doing. Look to us for the trusted info. And on the right-hand side, this is how to spot misinformation and be prepared. And of course, friends and neighbors, trusted people, a lot of content about professionalism coming from Florida. One of the most pronounced campaigns, Thank You Election Heroes, the day before Election Day. Several election officials, state and local, were sharing this message. Thank you for voting. Election officials and poll workers are part of your community. Treat them kindly, thank them for their service. So a more standardized content on the left-hand side and more personalized content on the right-hand side, but sharing the same exact message. One of the ways that we were able to track those campaigns is through hashtags. Hashtags are popular. It is a useful strategy, a tactic to follow this strategy. This is a small subsample of the hashtag activity going on in 2022 that captures a little bit of what we consider signals of trust and facts. Around the country, several states and local election officials were using their own hashtags to communicate, to signal those messages. Fact Friday in Maricopa County, Your Vote Counts in Harris County, Verified Election Info in Arkansas, Make Freedom Count, Pettis County, Missouri, Fact Friday, South Carolina, and also state campaigns like Your Vote Counts, North Carolina. We know the intention behind this campaign was to build trust. And of course, all of this activity is taking place within an ecosystem of national partners launching their own campaigns to support election officials, but also to amplify their message. Trusted Info campaign, National Voter Registration, Vote Early Day, Election Hero Day, National Voter Education Week, and of course the EAC supporting this work by amplifying. So a lot of very active, a lot of things going on. Thank you, Mara. And we can go to the next one.
Yeah.
So what did election officials emphasize in their posts? So our process allowed us to code content and weed out those specific terms used rather than a priori terms that election officials
check Twitter.
Trust the source, election officials.
Yeah, I'm so sorry, 1 second. I think that someone's not muted. Could we just all make sure that we have our microphones muted? There we go. Sorry about that. Go ahead, Leah.
Appreciate it. So signaling words that we were tracking: trusted, accurate, reliable, official. Interesting ways that election officials were communicating this as trust, as building. If it's not .gov, it's not us from Weber County, Utah. To alert voters where exactly to look and to be aware that there are some websites that they might be secure and they could appear as if they're official election websites. For trust the system, safe, secure, transparent, accurate, efficient processes. These are terms communicated by several election officials, both state and local, in 2022. The term bipartisan being used as a way to signal that it's not one side or the other, that we have processes that involve both parties to oversee the election process before, during, and after election. A nice example from Hillsborough County, Florida, our equipment is tested and state verified, of course, not the only one. Our voting machines have paper trail. This is obviously something that several election officials were communicating to voters. We verify our results. We use multi-factor authentication terms to signal that there are security safeguards in place to ensure that the process is safe, there is integrity, and votes are going to be counted accurately. And for trust the people, opportunity to go more personal. Of course, the friends and neighbor message, very, very common. Instructions and encouraging people to be kind to poll workers, thank them for their service. Election officials are dedicated. Those are terms used by election officials themselves. They're professional, they're heroes. Some personal messages that we think capture really well how election officials connect with their communities, and they're authentic. Family and communities, what an election is all about. Members of your very own community take time out of their schedules to serve you at your polling stations. They're your friends and neighbor, they're single parents, you meet them every day, be kind to them, they make elections work. Another way to signal trust, of course, is not going with the hashtag route or using hashtags in other ways. Of course, visuals are very, very integral to this messaging campaign. A specific shout out to Wisconsin Elections 101 on the top left side. They just received an Asset Innovation Award yesterday for their Elections 101 video series. So Wisconsin went hashtagless, but they did have a very robust communication campaign that they shared very frequently on social media, directly voters to access their videos on their website with this logo, Election 101. Georgia used this logo, Georgia leads in all their social media communication. Paul Gronke would be mad at us if we were not using Oregon as an example of their amazing voting Oregon, in Oregon feels good logo with all their communications. And we also want to highlight some of the great work coming out from Florida to incorporate those messages in their logos. Miami-Dade, bottom left, be informed, be involved, be election ready. San Bernardino County, your ballot, your vote, always secure. Again, many more election officials, not enough space to include them all. So Mara, you can take the rest. Thank you.
Yes, I will take over from here. Thank you so much, Leah. So I know, of course, we've been giving you a lot of information about the trends and the patterns that we identified through the coding and the work that we've done. And we want to offer some of our own insight about what we've found and understand to help build and bolster election official credibility on social media. Something that we have noticed is that there's not always name consistency across platforms and sort of in terms of the title that an account is called. And that's something that we know to be important to have that consistency, to have that that consistency to cultivate trust. Of course, many of you also have to campaign while you are running elections, while you're educating voters. And we have said some instances where it's not clear whether or not a post is campaign related or voter education related. But even more practically, something that we have found in some of our published work is that clear, concise messages are really important. Messages that have a to the point piece of information about a specific election topic can go a long way in terms of being received by voters. We've also noticed, and these are things that we came across as we were going through the coding, some really incredible efforts to make this information more accessible. Alternative text options, QR codes, posts with, it might seem like a small thing, but posts with clickable links instead of a photo with a link where someone would have to type that in. These are the kinds of things that seem small but make a huge difference to the voter who might have a need or have a disability, and for them to be able to access that information. Again, as I said above, don't drown the message. Keep your message clear and concise. We've also seen a remarkable effort by jurisdictions that have a diverse range of voters that speak different languages, offer content in different languages. And then finally, something that we have been tracking is whether or not official logos appear on visuals. This is something that we know can boost source credibility. We're also paying a lot of attention to content that is shared by you election officials that can that represents efforts to minimize the burden that you have to create new content. So there's a lot of great shareable content out there produced by, as I'm sure you're all aware, federal agencies, national partners, state associations, and state election offices. And we have just a couple of examples to show here about what this might look like for those of you who aren't necessarily sharing or resharing this kind of content. And so, we know, or we have been coding and tracking for this information as a part of our work as well. And it's something that we'll be able to look at and assess sort of the impact of, well, is a message shared from NASED going to be as effective, or is it going to have the same impact as a message straight from a local or state election office? Here's an example of content that is produced by the Election Assistance Commission. Always use trusted sources of information like your local and state election offices when researching how and where to vote. And so it's these kinds of things that we know are out there, many of you know are out there, but it's important to track and organize, and so we can understand how effective these campaigns are. Of course, we are focusing a lot on social media during this presentation, but we know that there are so many more ways that you as election officials can and do try to build trust. And one of the sort of the biggest takeaways that we've gotten from this research is the importance of connecting with your constituents, making those personal connections where possible. And so in our review of social media content, we've seen all of these amazing offline efforts, state election officials visiting local election offices, wonderful videos about getting to know the staff members at election offices, media events and appearances, community partnerships, town halls, visits to high schools, weekend review posts, e-newsletters, tours of election offices. There are some jurisdictions that have been advertising tours that they do of election offices, which is really cool for an election nerds like us. And then, of course, voter satisfaction surveys as well. So we wanted to make sure that we highlighted all of the examples of great offline things that folks do, knowing that not every election official is online. It is on social media. And so this is just one example of a really impressive outreach event schedule from San Francisco elections, a week of different outreach events geared at different groups. We have a presentation aimed at Latino voters, youth voters, senior voters, a resource table at a Pride event, a Juneteenth celebration. And so this is sort of just one example of the different ways in which you, election officials, are making efforts to engage with your community to register voters. Really important to note here, you can see there's an alternative text option. This is what we're talking about when we're trying to identify these different ways in which you as election officials are being innovative in reaching and accessing voters of all different needs and backgrounds. So we're moving towards the end here, and we want to talk about some of the challenges and opportunities that we have identified through this work. This is one of my favorite ideas here. Are you there, voter? It's me, your election official. It's going to be a book someday, I think. But I'm sure that a lot of you worry or wonder about whether or not your message is actually getting out there. And so we're trying to do work to understand, what you can do if you're online to amplify or to expand your following, to amplify the reach of your messaging. And that's sort of a part of our ongoing process. We also understand that you have this challenge of balancing transparency and accessibility. You need to be aware of the voters' information needs. But of course, there is, we think, a balance or a line that needs to be walked in terms of the transparency with which you are putting information out there. Reporting election data with limited resources. We see lots of efforts for folks to put results out there, to put data and information out there about voter lists and voter rolls, but not all election officials will have the resources needed to report election data in a way that is accessible and understandable to the public. And then, of course, as I've already touched on, we're thinking about this question about, well, what about election officials with no social media presence, and sort of how do you build trust offline, and what is the impact of these efforts? So in terms of the work that we have done to understand what actually does work, we know that signaling words like trust, secure, reliable. Leah and I have work that shows that there is a positive relationship between the usage of these words and the confidence that folks have that their ballot is counted as intended, and ballots across their state are counted as intended. So we have some evidence, some promising preliminary evidence that like these words, these signaling words that we've been tracking do have an impact. There's much more mixed evidence about the use of hashtag campaigns, particularly the Trusted Info campaign. In Leah and I's own work, we have seen actually a negative relationship in some instances between the use of this hashtag and voter confidence. There's questions about backlash effect. There are folks who are doing work to understand this on a more causal level through the use of experiments. So that's all to say that the jury is out, but it's something that we've sort of had our eye on for a while in terms of wondering if there is a backlash effect to these kinds of campaigns. And I am now going to turn it back over to Leah to bring it all home and wrap up the presentation. And then looks like we will have plenty of time for questions.
Thank you, Maura. Although the focus of this webinar is to talk about how election officials build trust and explicit measures of trust is what we focused on, we also want to highlight all of the different ways election officials connect with their voters and how much they care about democracy. We are fortunate that we were able to capture several activities from our coding process and different ways that election officials connect. Franklin County, shout out to Franklin County, Missouri, their election officials sing. They produced a video where they sing in preparation for election day. We found this very unique and very, very sweet way to show the care that election officials bring to the table. They want their voters to know about their options. So the term option itself used several times. One of the hashtags, More Days, More Ways in California, encouraging voters to participate via early voting or vote by mail. Voters have options. It's not only on election day. They want to make sure their voters are vote ready, making sure you have your ID, what to anticipate at the polls, what is intimidation and what isn't, that voters have rights and what the rights are and what to do if they feel the rights are violated, who is going to be present in a polling place, and voters should be aware. All of this information is shared by election officials. Things happen last minute, emergencies happen, weather emergencies. Election officials are quick to inform their voters about upcoming hurricane on election day. You better vote early if you want to cast your vote and don't have any issues. The same in Texas and Washington, some weather emergencies in House states, election officials responded to inform their voters and encourage them to be proactive and vote earlier. In many jurisdictions and states, free rides to the polls. Their election officials want their voters to vote. They want to remind them of their options and they want to encourage and facilitate participation. Election officials also have a sense of humor. This is just one of the multiple examples. Election officials are being, local election officials specifically, they are funny, they make jokes about election day, they have memes, they are very creative. State election officials as well, they share a lot of memes to connect with their voters. But this is an example that they're also humans. It's not a machine behind the election process. They're actual people running elections. And last but not least, something that we really, really care about and we track, election officials are authentic. They, first and foremost, they put their soul into running elections, and many are going very personal to communicate that to their followers and their voters. This is just one example, very genuine, thank you, the work that is behind making elections work. And we really consider that as a great illustration of the authenticity of election officials and how it is very important to them that they make voters know that those are people and they're from your community, that they run elections.
So with that, as a really wonderful and uplifting conclusion, we're going to turn now to, we've got about 10 minutes for, by my count, for questions. And I think that one thing I just want to add here as I'm reflecting on everything that we just shared is how much this work has brought us joy to see the passion that you election officials put out there in your preserving of democracy and your supporting of voters. And so this is really a showcase of some of the amazing things that you do. And we want to know how we can help. We have collected all of these data. We've given you an overview of the patterns that we found, and there's still so much more work to do. So I think that I'm going to go ahead and stop screen sharing. Leah, do you think that's okay? Okay, yeah, let's do that. And then we can field some questions. So let's see, we've already have some in the Q&A, and Claire, I don't know, would you mind feeding us some questions? Would that be okay?
Sure thing.
Yeah, thank you.
I will just read them as they come in. So Jeff Greenberg asks, curious what your thoughts are on election officials building trust by connecting with stakeholders and advocates as well.
Yeah, this is an open empirical question. It's not something that we have tested or examined in depth at the moment. Sort of thinking through it theoretically, I think that a lot of it depends in terms of the impact of those connections on who the stakeholders are. In the 2020 elections, some of the nonpartisan groups that were supporting election officials did get quite politicized, unfortunately. But it would be a really interesting process to sort of look at the different pairings and the connections that folks are making and examining that relationship with confidence. Leah, I don't know if you want to add anything else there.
Yeah, I will say that from our conversations with both state and local election officials, they are excited to work with community partners other than the national stakeholders that we usually talk about, and some of them might be politicized, but many work with the League of Women Voters, with the Carter Center, with disabled community organizations. And many times we or other stakeholders, we help bring them together, they explore options. And from our experience, election officials consider them great message amplifiers because some of those stakeholders and partners have source credibility within their communities. So many election officials have told us that this helps them share the message, but through a different messenger whom voters trust within their community. So amplifying the message is a great benefit in the community, in the fight to build trust in the election process.
Great. Next question comes from Grace. Do you know if there is any pending federal legislation on funding election offices evenly across the US so they have consistency in releasing data, information, and last-minute changes on voting polls, etc.?
I don't know of any. We actually have a number of folks who are on our panel. So anyone else who's here, feel free to weigh in. Leah, I'm not sure if you have any insight on this.
Well, I think the evenly distribution of funds is a challenge, and even if there is funding, and of course there's a lot of work, great work put down to increase funding, at least from the federal government, but also the states, to election officials. The reporting of data consistency, that's also a challenge because states have different needs, they have different ways they want to do, so complete standardization is also a challenge. But there seems to be an interest in the election community and from partners like the EAC and other groups to support election officials into thinking the best way to communicate those, the data specifically in the process, like election data, so that there is some consistency, as you said. But in terms of even distribution of funds, that's a challenge. But I hope our local election officials will be able to address this question either now or the next panel.
And I will add that Leah and I have work, and we have published work and ongoing work that looks at the impact of some of the federal funding that's been put out there in recent years through in response to the COVID pandemic, ongoing HAVA funds, et cetera. So that's also data and information that we work with.
Next question from Jennifer Roberts. Is there any messaging to counter fears of the use of AI?
This is a great question. We are agnostic. We know that this is something that election officials are aware of, and we do anticipate that several of the workshops that election officials are participating in, NASED, NAS, EAC, this is something that when with CISA, this is something that they are learning how to navigate. I expect that we will deal with this in 2024 in our communication tracking. As of now, I expect it's something that the next panel will be able to answer.
Yeah, it's not anything that we've seen yet in the tracking that we've been doing, but right now we're just tracking up to November 2022. And so I would imagine as we continue our tracking that, especially given the explosion of AI concerns, that we'll start seeing that more.
Scott Whitlock asks, what are best practices for multi-language or non-English messaging?
Thank you. This is a great question. So there are some great examples coming from Washington State, California, where the same content is shared through multiple languages, either through different posts or through one post in Broward County does that too, the same post, but all the different translations. Although the population of non-English speaking communities might be smaller than the English speaking community population, we assume that they all have the right to the same information access. So we have been tracking the proportion of posts that are shared in volume across different languages. But one of the best examples we have seen is that the actual content is shared. So the flyer is translated and shared at multiple times. And at the same time, election officials are going into these communities through different events. They share the information, naturalization ceremonies, different cultural events to showcase their work. So there are different ways, but in terms of social media content, this is not uniform at all, but there are some concrete examples where the information is posted across different languages other than Spanish, with Spanish being the default.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I will say we've seen both separate posts, a post in Spanish, a post in English, a post in Chinese, and also in the same post, English, Spanish, Polish. And, that's, something sort of my instinct would be to say the separate posts are probably more effective just because they're clear, they're concise, they're straightforward. You're not sort of weeding through different languages with a lot of information on one post, but it's also something that, we need to explore further.
Robin Letter asks, can your data be viewed by state?
Yes. And that reminds me, I had meant to say, to election officials on this call, we're happy to, if you have a social media presence, we're able to pull your data by jurisdiction, by state, and help you look at trends over time, and, answer some questions and things like that. So please don't hesitate to reach out and connect with us, and we'd be happy to help you with that.
Couple more questions. I'm going to wrap two of them together because I think they go together. One is, do you have suggestions on how to build your audience and followers? And the other one is, are hashtags important across all platforms? Are they actually used, for example, on Instagram or Facebook, or are they really just a Twitter thing?
We have seen, yes, so hashtags are predominantly used on Twitter, but we have seen it is a common strategy for election officials to have the message prepared and then share it across different platforms. So we did observe identical messages in the same, with a difference of 1 minute across different platforms. And therefore it makes sense to keep it and use the hashtags. Of course, it's more common on Twitter, but we did see a lot of hashtags on Instagram and Twitter as well. There were some states and locals that would remove hashtags altogether, but more or less hashtags were used, and in some cases excessively, across all platforms.
And then in terms of building your audience and followers, this is something that, of course, we get a lot of questions about this. So many of these accounts, unfortunately, have, very, a somewhat low follower count and things like that. And I think about this a lot, especially in terms of young voters. And the thing that we are noticing is that it seems like, and many of you on this call might agree, like it seems like election officials are having to behave more and more like campaigns. Like you have to sort of build a following, and you have to put campaigning type messages out there in order to attract interest. And so, at present, I can't say that we have any concrete suggestions about how to build your following. We do see lots of really, like we highlighted, really creative efforts, to put messages out there, memes, GIFs, videos, and things like that. But at the same time, we recognize the ecosystem is so awash with information, and there's so many different sources of information that folks have to look to. I think
maybe
we can go to 11:50 if that's okay with folks.
Yeah, maybe a couple more if that's okay.
Yeah, some good questions coming in here. Sophia asks, any advice on how smaller counties can have the same impact as a larger county like LA County when they don't have as many people, funds, resources, etc.?
So I will plug our last panel that offers, we're going to be spotlighting some folks in different organizations that offer a lot of really amazing services, many of them pro bono for election offices. And one of those services is an option to both customize, but also it's a template for creating social media content. So essentially it kind of takes out the work of having to create your own content. And there's a platform and a system that Ideas 42, who we're going to be spotlighting later this afternoon, has put together. And so there are lots of, as I'm sure you're all aware, lots of wonderful resources that are out there to sort of minimize the time burdens for something like managing a social media account. Leah, I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, that's pretty much it.
Yeah. So please, if you're interested, please do. We have some really amazing folks who are jumping in to offer support, especially to smaller counties. And so that'll be spotlit in our last session.
Great. Are there certain signal words that resonate more in blue states versus red states, or did the signal words resonate across all states, regardless of partisan affiliation of constituents?
This is a great question. We haven't yet tested the impact depending on red or blue states. Something, however, that we observed is specific terms used by officials that are from Republican-leaning states and Republican officials as well. So highlighting the term integrity. So Louisiana Secretary of State, Kentucky Secretary of State, integrity, our system has integrity. Substituting the term misinformation for another term like falsehoods and inaccuracies. We also observed that, but across the board, the term trust was obviously used, but we also did identify in some cases more emphasis in using the word integrity. Our state has been evaluated as the first in election integrity, and we don't want cheating in our state. So we did identify those patterns specifically among states that seem to be catering to, or the performance of the state is more Republican leaning rather than Democratic leaning.
The thing that I'll add to that, and this is from separate research, but we've had conversations with state election officials who will develop messaging campaigns depending on their audience. So acting very much like a political campaign, using certain words when they're targeting Republican voters, other words when they're targeting Democratic voters. And so these efforts are out there. We know that election officials are thinking about this. And so it's something that I think we're probably going to see more and more of as we move into 2024.
Great. Rose Kaniski asks, is there any research on effective ballot language? Interested in the way information is communicated there?
I would point to the Center for Civic Design has some incredible resources about, and I think that Rose is asking about sort of the ways in which ballots are set up and organized, and I could be incorrect on that. But the Center for Civic Design has some really great templates and resources about best practices for ballot design, and that includes things like ballot initiatives and referendum where things can get quite wordy. Yeah, Leah, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, so we did observe one good example is specifically for states like California, where the ballot is very long and there are a lot of ballot initiatives. Something that we observed is the connecting to here's where to go to the voter guide and here's to go to the pamphlet where you can read those, the language. There were some examples where the whole language was posted on a Facebook post, which is of course very difficult to read. But there were great examples of localities and states partnering with the League of Women Voters, Arizona State University, to say they put together this voter guide. These are the ballot initiative explained and what to expect. There are also some efforts from election officials to inform voters that it's okay. This is what straight ballot voting means, and this is what you would do straight ticket voting. How you would do it, ballot marking techniques and methods, what pen to use, all of this relevant to ballot design and how a ballot is structured. And of course, pictures of sample ballots for voters to access, but also to link to the sample ballot itself.
We have two more questions, and then I think we'll probably have to call it for this session. We've also got, folks have given a couple of interesting resources that I will put in the chat for everyone to see. But our last two questions are, Mike asks, do you have a recommendation on when to ignore versus engage with mis or disinformation? And Ricardo asks, do you all forecast any potential scams or issues with paid verification on social media? Considering that people can pay for a blue check mark, use these hashtags, have phishing attempts, or anything of that nature. Have you seen this at all? Is this something to be concerned about?
So the first question, ignore versus engage with mis or disinformation, because of course you're wary about there being a backlash effect if you are directly engaging with mis and disinformation. And something that we've seen, which is a little bit difficult to parse out, that seems to be a good middle ground, is responding to mis and disinformation, but in a way that's sort of an implicit response. So if there's misinformation out there about marking a mail ballot, or a flyer that voters have received, putting something out there that offers the correct information but doesn't necessarily explicitly say we're correcting or responding to this disinformation. It is really, though, I think a fine line to walk. Leah,
one of the examples that we shared in the presentation was I think from, I can remember the jurisdiction, about information from a vendor saying that you can vote online, or you can use your text, or texting information about polling places to voters. And the election office issued a statement that we do not send texts about polling locations. This is not coming from us. And this is where to look to for the accurate information. So, addressing the issue, and of course there are other more subtle ways that are the standard misinformation responses, about mail voting accuracy and reliability. But there have been ways that we observed in real time, responding on Twitter, for example, when somebody says, "Oh, I just voted in 10 states," or "This is not how you do things in Michigan, you're wrong." And election officials, the communications of saying, "Can you provide us with more information?" And you cannot do that because that is fraud. And of course, no response after that, which is clear there are trolls out there who want to make their life difficult. We haven't seen any. Election officials are aware of this, and sometimes they prefer not to engage, but address the issue by not giving more credibility to those who spread the misinformation. Mm-hmm. And I think the last question was about
check marks.
Check marks.
The campaign that so many of us have been on to encourage Facebook and Twitter and Instagram to just give election officials verified blue check marks. It seems like it's no longer relevant, giving this shift and being able to pay for a blue check mark. So I do anticipate that there are new strategies that election officials are unfortunately going to have to navigate and come up with in order to sort of give their platforms that official stamp of significance.
I wanted to address one last question before we let everybody go, at least for a short break. What's the advice when the misinformation comes directly from the election officials? We hope that it's not the case. We haven't seen that yet because we assume that election officials care about putting accurate information out. And we really hope it doesn't happen. But I hope maybe the next panel can answer this question as well.
Yeah, that might be one we can hold over for the next panel. All right, we are going to take a 5-minute break, and then we will hopefully see all of you back here for our wonderful panel of local election officials. Thank you so much, and please don't hesitate to reach out with further questions or insight on the work that we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I think that we can probably get going again. Leah, are you there?
I am here and ready.
Hello, yay. Yes, I know that that last panel went over, but it was worth it to be able to address all of those questions. So it is just after 12, and I'm just going to give, I don't know, about 30 more seconds or so for folks to come back and get settled. Looks like we have many of our participants still here, which is so wonderful. And thank you again to everyone who answered questions and who engaged with our work and our research. And we do hope to hear from many of you with any other questions that you might have. So I think that we can begin our next panel, running from 12 to 12:45-ish. You know, we'll certainly go over if there is interest. We are so excited to have the following election officials here with us. As Leah already introduced at the beginning of the webinar, we have Julie Wise from King County, Washington, Dustin Zarni from Onondaga County, New York, Brianna Lennon from Boone County, Missouri, Jeffrey Danovich from Clayton County, Georgia, and Lori Edwards from Polk County, Florida. We know how valuable your time is, and we really appreciate you taking some of that time to be with us today. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my share so I can pull up my questions that we have. And so, you know, we're hoping that we can keep this pretty conversational. As all of you are aware, we had sent some questions to all of you to prep for our call today. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the first question, which is, did you have a specific strategy in mind when you were thinking about your communication in 2022 in particular? Was there anything you prioritized, any particular tactics that you tried? So we just really want to get a general sense of what you were thinking when you were mulling over ideas for how to communicate with voters in the 2022 election cycle. Yeah, Dustin, go ahead.
So one of the things that we really leaned into here in Onondaga County and in many of our counties in New York leaned into is the bipartisan nature of our Board of Elections. We happen to be pretty bipartisan here in New York. In fact, it's structurally bipartisan. There are two equal heads of the boards of elections in New York, and they are, one's Democrat, one's Republican. So we really leaned into that, and it really helped with some of the election denialism that, yes, did happen even in a bluer state like New York. There was still a lot of groups that formed after the 2020 elections that were focused on decertifying the 2020 election. And we really leaned into the bipartisan nature. We talked about how every step along the way had two sets of eyes, that even down to the polling sites, there were bipartisan, and we also again stressed all the double checks that we do and talked about how we audit the machines, how we audit the initial election night results, how we count the absentee ballots, when we count the absentee ballots. All of that stuff was done, and we try to lay it out by both of us laying it out as well, but also by stressing that there is always two people in the room, so to speak, figuratively or actually.
So bipartisan is sort of like the name of the game, the word that would sort of capture your messaging strategy, it sounds like, in 2022.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, in going forward, I mean, it's what we kind of were doing already because of the nature of the New York boards of elections, but every board of elections throughout the country has a bipartisan component to it, and outside participation. So it is something that we, put way more emphasis on than we did before.
Thank you. Brianna.
I wanted to just take it a slightly different direction and talk about not just the content, but what we were really focusing on in 2022 is consistency. We have branding. We've branded our office to be Vote Boone. We're not just the Boone County Clerk's office. We want to make sure that people are associating voting with our office. And in addition to everything that we saw happen in 2020, we also realized that there's not a lot of people that think of us synonymously with voting. And especially because we're a college town, we did surveys of college students who said, well, we can navigate your website when we get to it, but we didn't even know you had a website. We never thought to go to your website. And so we wanted to use our social media campaigning and presence to be focused on consistency, to try to break through that awareness level. And tied in with that, we also tried to be not cool. We're not cool. I'm not cool, but relevant, like culturally relevant. So that's why we have, I mean, we started in 2020, but that's why we have a TikTok. And we're not as good as we should be at updating it, but when we do it, we try to do it based on what the trends are and things like that, so that we can get more traction when we have the ability to invest in time. And that's something we're taking into 2024 too, is maintaining a consistent level of posting to try to make sure that people are thinking of us as we go into the election season.
Yeah, thank you. Julie.
Good morning, everyone, from a foggy, cloudy Seattle, Washington this morning. It's great to be with you all. First of all, Brianna is so cool. So I do not know what she's talking about. That's my first exception this morning. But we're really fortunate here in the Pacific Northwest to have the Center for an Informed Public at the University of Washington in Seattle. And they've really been studying misinformation and how it spreads online. And they've shared their findings on elections with our teams across Washington state at our elections conference and really keeping us informed. They suggested 3 core messages that have shown to be effective when confronted with misinformation. And the first is elections are transparent, and talking about how you demonstrate that, right? 2, exactly what Dustin is talking about. Elections have bipartisan oversight. And 3, elections are conducted by trained professional election administrators. Those are themes that we weaved into all of our communications, from social media to press interviews to educational materials. And we found that they really did resonate with voters and media alike. I also find, just for me personally and the other people that sort of speak on the behalf of King County elections, it's so nice to have a few overarching messages to focus on. It helps to provide direction when you're talking about our work and telling our story. It also gives us a thing to pivot to in interviews and comment threads in nearly every situation. So those were really important to us. Also, we like to try to keep it positive. And I know this is true of a lot of election administrators. I think so many of us are like over talking about 2020. Let's talk about the great work that's happening now and into the future.
Thank you so much. And it sounds like sort of those talking points that you have, it sounds like you have developed a really, they almost sort of sound like these values that are interwoven into all of the communications. And it must be so nice to have that foundation to rely on as you put information out there. Lori, Jeffrey, what would you guys like to add to this conversation?
In Polk County, Florida, we really focused on repeating the message about trusted source. And as a matter of fact, I think repetition is so important. I think repetition is almost as important as the quality of the message. And I say that because I know myself, and I'm not a heavy social media user by any means. I'm inundated with hundreds of thousands of messages every day, and they come and go, come and go, come and go, come and go that day, as well as other stimulation that you're getting elsewhere from the media. So, I mean, frankly, it's as old as communication, but the idea of repetition, I think, cannot be underestimated. And the other thing besides that trusted source thing, which I just love, that we focus on here in Polk County, it's a little mantra of mine, and that is what the voter needs to know now. What the voter needs to know now. Not next week, not last week, not generalized. What do they need to know today? Tomorrow's the deadline for this. Don't forget all the vote by mails are going, whatever it is, just keep it current and repeat that same thing. What's important to them today. They're not thinking about tomorrow, and they're certainly not thinking about last week.
Yeah, and so 2 things, that consistency. Yes, we know as researchers how important that consistency is, and sort of keeping the eye on the prize, so to speak, in terms of what information the voter needs in this moment. That's so important. And that is something that we've seen in your communications. Jeffrey.
One thing that I definitely want to add is if you start a social media campaign, especially if you're in a smaller county, is make sure you have the support of your local government, of your local board. In a previous election cycle, I went up to my director and asked her if I could start a Twitter account for our Board of Elections. We already had a Facebook account and it wasn't getting that much traffic. So I figured, we could get another avenue to put information out there, put the trusted info out there. So I approached my supervisor and asked her if I could start a social or a Twitter account for that county. And she said, I really don't care. It doesn't matter to me. Do what you want to do. So I started it off and I put out the information that was relevant to the people of that county. And I also started a Mythbuster Monday series where I would address some of the bigger problems or the bigger pieces of misinformation, disinformation. And I made sure to do it for like the pieces of misinformation and disinformation. I made sure it was a conscious effort to address those issues from both sides. Because, there's one side that says you're doing it wrong. Another side says you're doing it wrong. So I just wanted to I made a conscious effort to address both sides. This was going on for about 3 or 4 weeks. And my boss came to me, she says, did you start that Twitter account? I said, yeah, it's been active for a few days. I mean, we don't have any local voters, but we have like a lot of statewide election officials that are following us. A lot of nationally respected subject matter experts on elections were following us as well. And she says, oh, okay. And that was it. About a week later, I get called into the office and I was told that, or she was relaying a message from our local board of commissioners, pull the plug on the Twitter account. So that was disappointing. And no more, there was no more Twitter. So, but the message I'm trying to relay here is make sure that you have board support or local government support for your efforts.
Yeah. And that is, it's not something that we've come across a lot, but in talking to folks who aren't active on social media or active on certain platforms, that is something that comes up alongside, of course, the time and the resource drain that it can take. So I think I want to use my moderator prerogative and bring a question back from the first panel that I think all of you might be a little bit better equipped to answer, which is, do you have any sort of insight or advice that you can offer counties and jurisdictions that might really lack the resources to do an impressive social media campaign or voter education outreach, not assuming that you all have the resources you need, because we know election offices are notoriously underfunded, but any insight that you might have to offer for our friends who from smaller jurisdictions that don't have the funding and resources. I think this would be a really useful time to talk about that.
I'll kick it off. I don't know that I have the answer.
Yeah, there's no one answer. But I think that it's good to crowdsource these kind of things.
Yeah, so just last week or the week before, the Senate Appropriations Committee proposed $75 million in election funding for 2024. That's 30 cents a voter across the country. So we know that that's a start, right? It's like a down payment. But we appreciate the Senate recognizing that there is a need for consistent, reliable funding across the country for elections that we run for the federal government every 2 years, but that they don't pay for. And we don't have any jurisdictions, right, that don't have to pay for their elections, generally speaking. So one group that I think that is, I'd love to put a plug in, I hope it's okay, is Issue One. And Issue One has a Faces of Democracy program. Several folks here that are on the panel, election buddies, yes, from across the country. We went to DC and we advocated to Congress and to the White House this need for reliable funding, as it's really impacts our most rural and small counties the most that don't have that reliable funding, right? So we are calling for $400 million in federal election grants. That's really the kind of investment that we need to protect our democracy. So that work is happening. Check out issue 1's Faces of Democracy. There, put calls out to Congress to get a reliable, consistent funding. And I guess I would suggest too, you could do that at the state level, but I'll kick it over to my other colleagues here that I'm sure have a better answer there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Julie. And yes, we welcome, we can throw it in the chat, the inclusion of any and all resources that you guys have had your eyes on, because you know best. Brianna.
So I would add, and this is slightly, it's related to social media, but I think it's slightly pertinent mostly to the rural and smaller counties. In Missouri is the majority of smaller counties, is that I think one of the things you need to do also, it can be really easy to feel like, oh, well, we need to have 5 or 6 different mediums to communicate with people, is take stock of your backyard first and determine whether you need a TikTok account or you need an Instagram account. It may be that, and especially I've talked to people in very, very rural areas where they still find the most success in putting like a sandwich board outside of their office because most people come to the town square and that's where they are. So take like an inventory of how you normally communicate with people, or not just elections information, but how does most of the information get shared in your neighborhood? Is there like a good, bad, and ugly Facebook group that everybody seems to jump on? Then maybe Facebook is a good place to put something and try to get information going that way. And then you don't need a Twitter and things like that. Don't always think that you have to have the full suite of social media. I have fallen prey to that. I mean, that we have some accounts that we don't update nearly as much, and maybe we should or maybe we shouldn't, but everything is unique to you. You don't have to just copy and paste from other places.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really excellent point, thinking about just the incredible diversity of jurisdictions and jurisdiction needs that we have here in the United States. Lori.
I think that the resources that you and Maura mentioned earlier, and I think you'll be covering in the next hour, are a tremendous asset that weren't around to speak of. It's 5, certainly not 10 years ago, that everybody needs to know about. But, you know, one of the beauties of social media is it's so low cost. I mean, it's kind of free. I know it takes time, but you know what? That's about discipline. That's about building that first 15 minutes into your morning, or staying 10 minutes later at the end of the day and just doing what you need to do to get that job done if you don't have any extra resources to hire somebody special. But it's kind of goes contra to what Brianna just said. But in Florida, we're kind of proud of stealing from each other. And I want to encourage all those small jurisdictions to go out there, surf around, find something you like and steal it. Then just send an email if you want to that jurisdiction to say, thanks, that was great. I hope you don't mind. Because I have found every election official is happy to share.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you guys are so creative. I mean, like, just the things that you guys put out there are so wonderful and often entertaining, and there's so much great stuff out there. Dustin. Oh, you're muted. Bound to happen at least once.
You know, 3 years into the pandemic, I'm still muting myself when I'm trying to talk. But that's the way it is. One of the things I wanted to talk about was kind of brought up in the previous discussion, and it was like how to engage and when to engage on social media. And I've kind of adopted a strategy of trying to remember that there's a lot of people that watch your social media that don't interact, that don't like, they don't share, they don't comment, but they read. And so when there are, for lack of a better term, trolls out there or disingenuous people that are engaging with you on these platforms, I try to, create a reasonable standard in my responses. I will respond sometimes to disingenuous posts with facts, but then limit the engagement after that, which allows me to believe that, and I hope I'm right, that the reasonable person that is reading these comments, that are reading these posts, are giving the facts, and then I also then limit, and for my own mental health, my interaction with some of these disingenuous people. So I do tend to be very engaged on social media. I do it in my personal capacity, but also our board has a very engaged, the board stays to Facebook and Twitter. I've done Instagram and Threads now and other things, and probably way too many things. Hootsuite is a wonderful, or those types of cross posters are wonderful ways to manage a lot of that. But I do feel like engaging with these disingenuous people is important, but you do need to limit it, because you don't want to get involved in debates or flame wars or any of that. You just want to get the facts out there. And I feel really, Jeffrey's story from earlier in the panel is really disheartening. And it's also one of the reasons why lead election officials need autonomy in their job, and cannot be told by their the structure of lead election officials in your state. You should advocate for laws that give lead election officials autonomy to be able to do their job the way they want to do it, and not be told from on high to not engage with the public, for political purposes.
See, I'm muted. I just did it. Some really helpful practical advice that you just offered there, especially in thinking about how you protect your own sanity and mental health in doing this work and interacting with these folks. Jeffrey.
Just piggybacking on what Dustin said about engaging. When I see close friends of mine, like people that I actually know, spewing out this information, then I'll engage. So a lot of, like, back when the Eric debate was going on, I know the Eric debate is still going on, but there's a trigger or some mechanisms here in Georgia where you have to remove voters from the voter rolls. If they've moved out of state, or they haven't actively engaged in voting in in multiple election cycles. That's a trigger to remove. Mm-hmm. Now, because of things that may or may not have happened in the past, every time Georgia removes a voter, it becomes news. And that's unfortunate. Mm-hmm. But that was years ago, and right now, the way we do things in Georgia is it's a good thing to have clean voter rolls. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I'll engage in. If friends of mine are saying, oh, Georgia's doing this. No, they're doing it for a purpose. This is the reason why they're doing it, and they're following the law. There's nothing nefarious about what's going on. This is a good thing to have clean voter rolls. That's when I see friends, or when I see acquaintances of mine spewing misinformation, I will call them out on it. And my role as an election official, they'll be, oh, okay, yeah, I guess Jeff has a point, and then they'll stop.
And it's so interesting, because it sounds like you really act as an information leader and an opinion leader in your community, in terms of leveraging that expertise and that insight with the folks that you're closer with.
Yes,
oh, sorry, go ahead, Jeffrey.
Oh, I do it as an individual. I don't do it as a representative of my county, because on my socials, nowhere does it state my employer. Mm-hmm. It just says, in my Twitter bio, my Threads bio, it just says Georgia electionologist. I know it's a made up word, but it sounds cool.
I love it. And so it's so interesting. You're talking about communicating, what election law is and what it does and what its function is, to folks who might be misinformed. And that's actually a really nice segue into, our next question. Although, Dustin, do you want to add anything?
I did, because the tag of Jeffrey's end of the answer kind of leads me to an important thing too, because it's kind of a fun story. You need to segregate your personal social media and your professional social media.
Yes.
And I learned a lesson in 2016 I did not have a public Facebook page. I had my private Facebook page with friends, and it had my, and like you normally do. I was a kind of a young elections commissioner then. I was only in for about 3 years before 2016. And as you do, you put your work info on there and stuff like that. And I made a couple of comments on election day that day on my Facebook page, because my friends were tagging me, because Onondaga County never did I vote stickers before there. And Starbucks and a lot of other places were giving out free coffee if you showed your I voted sticker. And so a lot of my friends were giving me a little harassment, good-natured, jovial harassment on my Facebook page. And I made a comment about if they would care about early voting and some other reforms, instead of I voted stickers, maybe we would have those. And the press picked that up and ran with it, even though it was my Facebook personal page. After that, I decided to create an actual page on Facebook for me personally as a public figure. And it was a good learning experience. And then now I understand that when I interact on Twitter, when I interact on Instagram and some of these other things, because they are my professional thing, I've kind of not been as snarky, although sometimes I still get a little snarky. But I try to keep that in mind, and then I keep my my pictures, my personal stuff on my private stuff that I don't use to spread election news, because of this rise of online trolls that will do whatever they can, and sometimes the press aids them in that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just really important advice, I think, for any of us who have like a more public role as well, to keep those things separate. So Jeffrey, I see that you have your hand up, and I'm gonna pick on you for the next question, but you also might want to add, your insight into what Dustin just shared. We've talked a lot about communicating information to voters about election processes, the reason for cleaning voter rolls, things like that. And we're really curious to know about how you guys think about the way that you balance providing information about the mechanics of voting. Here's what you need to register, or here's how you mark your mail ballot, or here's your polling place, to the physical things voters need to do to cast a ballot, compared to messaging about security of elections, election processes, logic and accuracy tests, audits, things like that. So how do you guys think about balancing those two things, like what voters need now, like Lori said, versus sort of the bigger picture of the actual administration of elections? So Jeffrey, since your hand was up, I'm gonna throw it to you. And feel free
I just wanted to make a quick comment about what Dustin said about I voted stickers and getting freebies. This has nothing to do with the discussion, but I actually do have a tattoo of an I voted sticker. And one of the reasons why is because some folks do give out freebies if you have an I voted sticker. So I just have a permanent one. Got it.
And then you always have to vote, because otherwise,
yes,
you have that time. There you go. That's great incentive. What are your thoughts on balancing, the different information needs that voters have with your need as election officials to, communicate about the security and transparency of elections?
Well, nowadays, what I do is I'm an election trainer, and that's my bread and butter. I have nothing to do with social media. And like I stated before, if I see any important news about elections, anything I find interesting, I'll post it on my Threads page. I'll post it. I've kind of walked away from Twitter because of reasons, but if I see something interesting, I'll post it on Threads. But in my official capacity, I'm nowhere near social media.
Yeah, I would be so curious to hear from other folks about sort of balancing those communication needs.
I would just say there's no special formula, right? Unfortunately, I think, both providing that baseline information and physically showing the security of our elections are both important. I could just tell, for example, in King County that the way that we reassure voters that elections are secure is walking them through the process of showing them the behind the scenes, whenever possible, what we sort of call radical transparency. And that can look like video explainers for each step of the process of the ballot when it comes back from our voters, right? They put it in the mailbox, they put it in a Dropbox, then what happens, and sort of demystifying that process. It can also look like simply humanizing elections, which is something we've really leaned in, you know, that election skeptics speak about election administrators like we're just some shadowy group of bad actors, when in reality, we live and work and care about the communities that we're serving. You know, we're at PTA, we're in the store, in the line at the grocery store with you, and really showing our voters that we are human beings and their neighbors, I think can go a long way. I'd also just add, I think a picture, of course, is worth 1,000 words. The more we can show folks what we do, the better it is. Pictures and videos, they don't need to be, I think, highly produced or flashy even, right? People just like to see what's going on. We've got web cameras across our facility to show us hard at work. We had a 1/5 of a mile plexiglass, so literally transparent loop around our ballot processing that voters can come in and watch us process. So, and then, you know, as far as information on voting and registration, we try to make it as fun and as engaging as possible. It's sometimes dry material to be sharing. And then of course, we translate many of those into our supported non-English languages so that they can easily be shared by our community partners and voters.
Yeah, I believe Leah spotlit the work that you guys do in our first panel. Go ahead, Dustin.
Yeah, so I again want to talk about the engagement with you know, some of the more disingenuous groups, because now they're actually starting to organize, and they're organizing as formal groups. They're taking more of an AstroTurf type of you know, type of presence in our community. So that is challenging. Again, you know, maybe I'm Pollyannish, but I do believe most of the public is on our side. And that has been proven in the wake of the 2020 elections and the 2022 elections. And yet there is this vocal minority that is out there. In New York, we had a group called New York Citizens Audit. And they you know, were born out of that. And we had some local people that were high public profile people that were involved in this. And I did engage the media on this. I knew that they didn't care about the points. They made, you know, they had these lists of discrepancies that they would put out there, and they were all completely bogus. One of the things is that some of the people had an 1850 birth date, but if they knew that in 1978 we never had to have a birth date in New York State registrations, and that was the arbitrary date that we all chose to put these old records in, and many of these older voters have never updated their registration, they would have asked us about it and we would have given them that answer, but they never gave us that opportunity. So I did have to go out to the press and give this information to the press, and it was laborious and time consuming, but it neutered the discussion, and I felt it was very important. And they did, because I've been engaging with the press all along, and I have an open, you know, press relationship and a good press relationship, I was able to, you know, affect that discussion in a way that was beneficial. Now they're starting to send people to their town boards and trying to get town board resolutions. So they're not going to go away, and that's where you know, I'm a little pessimistic about some of these groups. We're never going to change their minds. But again, it's the silent person that is reading this. It's the people in the media. It's the things that you can point to your efforts to try to combat this. That is something that is important. And yes, we have to get out of our shells. We can't always, you know, just be behind closed doors, counting votes like many of us want to. We have to be advocates for our profession and for democracy in itself.
Yeah, and something you said something about, it's the silent people reading. I think that something that I've often thought a lot about is how, you know, you have your follower count, you want it to be higher, But your information, the social pages often like come up in searches, you know, so you might have a lot of folks who are going to your pages, not necessarily following. And we've seen a lot more election officials who are doing like the search engine optimization and sort of making sure that it's their official sources that come up first when voters search. And so that's a really important point about the silent reader, the folks who are just reading but not engaging. I do want to make sure that we leave some time for audience questions, but there's at least one question I am like dying to hear a response to, and it's a question about assessment. I think Leah will agree that this is something we're really interested in. And we want to know a little bit more about how you guys measure success in terms of your outreach to voters. Are there specific metrics that you use? Is there any help we can offer as researchers? We just want to know a little bit more about sort of, you know, what you're looking at when you're making decisions about your communications and how you're evaluating their impacts.
Sure. I'll start. Oh, sorry, Lori, you had your hand up first.
Yeah, Lori, why don't you go ahead, Lori? Thank you. And then Dustin will.
I was going to say, I agree with you. I want to know how to do this too. Other than what we all know, which is the analytics for social media, we don't have an answer, or I don't have an answer for that, but I can tell you how I approach it. One, we try to be very smart and disciplined and intentional about our messaging, as I mentioned before, kind of the trusted source, and then what they need to know then. I mean, and I make sure that everybody on our outreach team, as well as social media and our customer service team that are answering the phones every day, have a really good sense of what that message is. Okay, so that's kind of the how, or the content, if you will. And once you feel comfortable with that, then what I say is just do more. Okay, so it's all about inputs. I hope to learn. I hope to walk away from this today understanding how to measure how the impact that we have. I'm afraid that we would probably find out that our impact is minimal and we wouldn't want to get out of bed in the morning. Okay, but I don't believe that when I get up every day. I believe if we hit one more community event, if I get another press release out, if we are sure to do repetition on social media, I give yet another speech, we visit yet another school, every single time we do that, we're putting a penny in the pile, you know? Yeah. And so I really, just for my mental health, look at it as it's all about inputs, and you can't, but hopefully we'll find the answer to that.
Well, we'll offer a modicum of hope for you. Leah and I, we love Florida because of the voter education survey that you guys do. And we do know, you know, Leah, we need to put together like an explainer of all of the stuff that we found, because we do know that your community partnerships, like putting ads in newspapers, posting about registration online, like this helps voters register. And so like at that small level, like we know that in Florida, what you guys are doing, matters. And so, yeah, obviously, you know, don't have time to sort of go in depth into those findings. So I hope that gives you a modicum of hope and positivity.
Thank you to Lori, because you are the one who told us about the survey. Just
the survey. Oh my gosh. Yeah, we love the survey. Dustin, you had wanted to add some thoughts.
I guess I was just going to add, I mean, everything Lori said is pretty much what I was going to say, but also consistency is important too. Don't just think that you're going to post around election time. You know, one of the things, I have a podcast I do just about election stuff, and it's every week, and sometimes I don't have a lot to talk about, but I talk about the calendar and other things. And if you have a consistency to ways you're trying to outreach and communicate to people that they can sign up to be poll workers, they can, you know, there's a lot of things in the election calendar, we know that is year round. This is not a job that we work 2 days a year like all of our friends think. But you know, and be consistent that you are out there and not just trying to promote around election events. Promote what you're doing year round. Promote how to register to vote. Promote how to do poll worker training. And if you're out there in a consistent basis, then you're able to respond to some of this other stuff that comes up as well.
Mm-hmm. So if I'm like trying to sort of take headline takeaways here: consistency, be concise in your messaging, and transparency. These are sort of the big themes that I'm hearing here across the panel. So I want to ask last question, which is a two-part question. Looking forward to 2024, what are some things that you're hopeful about, and what are some challenges specifically that you're really kind of feeling angsty or worried about? I want to sort of have some optimism in there as we also look to the big challenges that the elections community is facing. Yeah, Jeffrey.
I'll go. As far as like in my role as a trainer, I hope that some of my students, once they finish the class, they'll put out on social media like, hey, this is, I went through poll worker training. It was a good class. I learned a lot. You should sign up too. So just spread the message through surrogates.
Yeah, that informal networking and building up a community of folks who want to work and support elections. Mm-hmm. Brianna?
I think one of the things that does make me hopeful is with 2022 being relatively quiet, as it were, and knowing that 2024 is not going to be, I'm encouraged by the fact that there are so many federal partners and groups that are interested in amplifying our messaging, that will be beneficial, because we didn't have that in 2020. And everyone, I feel like, is now prepared for the need to do that. So I am optimistic of that. What does concern me, or at least keep me up at night, is that I feel like we don't know what we don't know, but that's how we prepared for previous elections before. And so I feel like there's going to be some unknown in 2024 that we won't know what it is. Hopefully we have enough of a structure to deal with it. But in 2016, it was cybersecurity. We were sure in 2020 it was going to be cybersecurity. So that's what we prepared for. And then it was misinformation. Yep. Now it's misinformation. Who knows what it's going to be in 2024. But I feel like we now have a very good network of solidarity that will help us, hopefully, no matter what it is that comes up in 24.
We had a question from the previous panel about AI. Do you have any of you insights about preparing for the penetration of AI into social media and communications, and how election officials are ready to respond to that, or what resources that you have to respond to that?
I have no resources to respond to that.
I haven't even figured it out in my classroom yet. So yeah, Dustin, go ahead. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, I'll respond to the AI thing first. I think it's important to remember that AI is going to be a political tool more than an elections tool, I think. And it's really hard for us to respond to political messaging and still try to remain nonpartisan, bipartisan in our roles. I think that, the rise of AI, will create more disinformation out there, and the quantities will be harder, and they'll make our jobs that much harder. But this kind of leans back into what I was going to say about what I'm most hopeful for. And it's kind of what, Brianna was saying too, is that there has been as these groups have risen to, to deny the elections, there has been an almost equal rising of pro-democracy groups. Mm-hmm. And there has been a, back before 2016, there were many times where I thought like people didn't really care about what I did, and now there are way more people in this community, in your own communities that care about what you do too now. And I think the role of the lead election official, being on the spotlight on the national stage has really kind of, brought to the public what these roles are, how vital they are, and how they also need to be protected, as opposed to many times in 2016, I kind of felt like I was out there on my own. And, some of these disinformation stuff was really kind of starting back then. And people were like, well, we don't have to worry about it. They can take the slings and arrows, but at the end of the day, we'll have an election and we'll move on. Now I think people are rising to our defense a little bit more, and I think the public, there is a pro-democracy reaction to this anti-democratic rise, and that is hopeful to me, because it could have gone the other way. It could. We were at a very dangerous point, and if that pro-democracy reaction didn't happen, we could see the end of our democracy. And that's what keeps me hopeful, is that this pro-democracy reaction is coming.
Absolutely. So let's see. I'm going to let us go till 12:50, if that's okay. And because there are a couple of questions in the Q&A that I want to get to. And Dustin agreed. I think that even within our own election sciences community, we've seen new scholars coming into the field, wanting to help, wanting to support elections through research. And so we're seeing a lot of that on our end as well. So there was a question from the previous session. When misinformation comes directly from election officials, is this something that you guys have come across in your communities? Because it's not something that I feel Leah and I have witnessed in our online observations, but you guys are much more hooked in. Are there the occasional bad faith actors out there? And if so, how do you navigate that? Dustin.
Yeah, so I think usually when this happens, look, we're humans. We're not perfect. And usually when this happens, it's more of a mistake than intentional misinformation. I happen to be the caucus chair of all of the Democratic commissioners in New York State. So many times I'm reacting and working with a lot of my other counties when they get into a particular bind, or when I see something that they're saying that isn't quite technically correct, or I've done it myself, and then I've had to correct it as quickly as possible. I think that's where, that misinformation comes in. I think, one innocuous thing that happened to me, I was talking to a reporter and we were talking about voter registration, and it was in 2020. And I was saying that, eventually in 2020, we were going to have the more voter registration in Onondaga County than in our history. And I used the colloquial term "at the end of the day," but he took that as literal. By the end of that day, we would have it. And it became kind of a thing with this reporter and I, and it was like a back and forth over something silly like that. And so, but I did correct it right away, and I took it on myself, and that's the kind of misinformation that I think is out there more than not. Also, I think sometimes election officials can be, a lot of us like the radical transparency, but some election officials tend to get afraid of explaining too much because they're afraid that other people will turn their words into misinformation. And I think we can't live in that world anymore. We have to be as transparent as possible and as engaging as possible, because they're gonna do what they're gonna do anyways. You want to have yourself on the record.
Yeah, and that actually is great. There's a follow-up for you, Julie. But anyone, of course, can answer. Prioritizing like your own safety and well-being with transparency. And Leah, I don't know if that was something you wanted to flag, or if you had something else that you wanted to add. But in a minute or two, any thoughts that Julie or any of you have on the ways in which you've approached this? I know there's a lot of folks on the call who would really appreciate some insight on how to balance, your own safety and well-being with, being transparent and being out there.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's a challenge, right? I think it's a challenge that we have to face, though, right? Is providing secure, accurate elections and that innovation and access to our elections. And I think that we're proving across this country that you really can have both, right? You can have secure elections that are accessible and transparent. Certainly we do things like have, security at our facility. So while folks can come in and tour the facility, we have security there on site. We've got security cameras. We've got badge readers and biometrics and layers of security to safeguard our employees while they're processing ballots, right? And so it's a delicate balance, of course, when you have vote centers and you have drop boxes, and we try to navigate that conversation of understanding that some folks are going to feel not welcomed at a vote center or a drop box if they see police or security presence, but also balancing that. So we have really honest conversations with the individuals that we hire for security of that balance that we're looking for, right? There is definitely something about body language and position that you can have that is going to make voters not feel welcomed, or the opposite, right? And so I think it's just a delicate balance, and I think it's something that we've been challenged with in election administration, especially the last decade or so. But I think that you see a lot of great things happening. Again, web cameras happening across, ballot tracking, all these sort of cool tools to provide access, but also keeping our elections secure.
Yeah, absolutely. Leah, I know we need to wrap up, but I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Maura. I wanted to, we're very grateful that you're sharing your experiences, and I wanted to flag something that I really appreciated that Lori mentioned about the inputs. So all of the items that you are identifying as things that you are doing in your community, we, at least in the election, the academic nerd community, we call them interventions. And so there are so many ways that the more interventions you put out there, cumulatively, it improves the voter experience. But there are concrete ways that we can help support election officials to evaluate the success. Election officials tell us about they increase their followers after their hashtag campaigns, or they get comments from voters and emails and notes in person. So all this anecdotal evidence, but there are concrete ways that we can help assess because we know that election officials care about this because your time is precious and you want to make sure that whatever plan you have, that it pays off, other than the anecdotal experience you receive. So some of the major things that we identify is, of course, positive voter experiences rather than turnout, of course, but concrete outcomes like voter registration increases, or lines at the polls, or reduced complaints about the election process, or usage of drop boxes. So all of the things were measurable, and we can help with that. But I would like to, I guess if it's okay to close with this, that academics love this stuff, and our community really wants to work with election officials. So part of the gap, I suppose, might be timid to reach out to election officials because you are busy, but vice versa. So we hope that we can start the broader conversation about bridging election officials with academics. And Lori, you have been so great, and Brianna and Julie and Jeffrey and Justin communicating with us and helping us. And we help each other basically because we want to improve elections. Of course, we benefit a little bit as academics from the publications, but the goal is to improve voter access. And this is a good way for us to help you with metrics and assessment and data analysis if you need it.
Yeah, it's a great way to end. So we have 6 minutes until our next panel. We hope that all of you will stick around and tune in to hear about some of the amazing work that folks are doing to support your efforts. Thank you so much to our election officials. You guys are just fountains of knowledge, and we appreciate all of you. So we're gonna hop off here for a little bit, probably check in with our upcoming panelists, and then we'll see everyone in about 5 or 6 minutes.
Thank you.
All right, it is just 1 o'clock. So Leah, I know that you and Charles are going to be navigating this panel, so I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to you, if that's okay, and take a seat, as it were.
Thank you, Maura. We're very grateful to have Charles Stewart moderating this panel, so you can get things started. Thank you, Charles.
Thanks, Leah. Excuse me. Thanks, Leah. Thanks, Maura. I'm really excited to be moderating this final panel today. It's been a great couple of panels before now. Before we hop into it, I did want to not only thank Mara and Leah for turning it over to me, but for putting this together. I mean, this has really been a wonderful couple of hours, and the final hour will be wonderful as well. This webinar is demonstrating not only really great substance, but the type of communities that can be put together when practitioners and election officials work together in order to tackle the great issues facing voting in the United States. When I go around the country talking to the public, to legislators, to decision makers about the sorts of things that we do at MedSol, the MIT Election Data and Science Lab, I point out that my favorite Broadway musical and film is Oklahoma. And there is a set piece in there where the song title is "The Farmer and the Cowman Should Be Friends." And in this context, oftentimes nonprofits and election officials are at loggerheads. And I think this is much like the farmer and the cowman out in the prairie in the late 19th century. So this is a great example of two kind of tribes or two sets of people who oftentimes are butting heads working together. And so I'm really excited. So we have 4 people who will be talking about what they and their colleagues have been doing in this space, and be Austin Burrell from Civic Roundtable, Avery Davis Roberts from the Carter Center, Steve Wanchik from Protect Our Elections, and Omar Parbu from Idea 42. And so we'll go in the order that I just named folks. And so if Austin, you can step up and do your thing.
Happy to. Thank you, Charles. Thanks, Claire. Thanks, Maralia, and to all the other panelists for such amazing content. Tough spot to be batting cleanup for me, Avery, Omar, and Steve, but we will do our very best. I am really excited to tell you a bit about a tool that we've been building, specifically a collaboration platform for state and local election officials called Civic Roundtable. And I'm sure the problem that we're solving is not wholly unfamiliar to the group that we're talking to today. You even heard a bit about it in just a few panels before, but figured I'd orient us first on kind of that initial pain point, which is the growing exodus of election officials leaving the field. This year is an excerpt from a recent report out of the German Marshall Fund's Alliance for Secure Democracy team. And I think it does a great job of synthesizing exactly why collaboration matters in the context of election administration. This collaboration platform that we're building is really geared not just at saving election officials time in the near term, connecting them with peers in other counties and other states, and also from organizations like the ones you see here that are designed to support them, but also to produce some sort of institutional knowledge that future election officials can tap into and learn from, so that people don't feel totally isolated or alone, not just when they're working in maybe remote jurisdictions or on new challenges, but also when they are stepping into the workforce for the very first time. And the way that we've thought about solving this problem is in the form of community through collaboration. And what we've designed to do this is a peer-to-peer collaboration platform that in its current form looks a lot like Reddit meets LinkedIn. That's designed to enable 3 things. First, making connections so that election officials in one county, one city, or even one parish can learn from folks within state lines and across state lines, but also from experts at the state, federal, and regional level. Second would be getting answers. So if you are in the heat of early voting or poll worker recruitment, and you need to find exactly the right statute, the right piece of guidance, or the right resource, we want that knowledge to be at your fingertips. So rather than digging through dozens of emails or trying to find the right newsletter or blog post, we want you to find that expertise from not just folks on these panels, but from your peers more quickly. And then the last piece is all about finding resources. So again, rather than digging through inboxes or perhaps a SharePoint or shared drive, we want to make sure that we are pulling from the wisdom of the crowd, because the whole of elections is much greater than the sum of its parts. And this product did not come out of a vacuum. I myself came out of the Belfer Center, spent quite a few years working leading up to the 2020 and 2022 elections on their tabletop the vote exercise, and learned directly from election officials how this product might actually meet their needs, not just day to day or month to month, but over the course of election cycles. And that's how we came to develop our product roadmap, very much in line with the needs in real time of election officials at the state and local level. What I'll do now is just give you a quick preview of the work that we've done with specific states, just to give you a sense of how the platform has been used and the impact it's had. The very first state we partnered with and launched leading up to 2022 was Rhode Island. That was with Rob Rock, Kathy Placentia, and a whole host of locals across Rhode Island. And what we did with them is actually get a better understanding of, at the local level, the problems that kept them up at night, which you're seeing here on the left looks a lot like problems that we're talking about on these panels: recruiting poll workers, managing early voting, addressing misinformation through social media. And what we did with them is actually build out communities of practice that could share tactical information about the work that was happening on the ground, and getting access from these state agencies, whether it was the state board or the Secretary of State's office, that are really designed and meant to support them in their work. These communities also became sources of strength for election officials. I'll give a quick shout out to the documentary film No Time to Fail, which does a great job of highlighting the experience of Rhode Island election officials during 2020. And I'll just say that you all know it's a hard job. And a lot of the time, what these communities are really designed to do is make people feel like they are not alone in the work that they're doing, and that there are other people who are not just solving tactical challenges like navigating DMV backlogs, but also the emotional challenges of being an election official in such a challenging field. And over time, what we saw is this platform, was actually more utilized, as you might expect, when election officials got busy. So as you would see here in context of mail ballot deadlines, primary election dates, or voter reg deadlines, the election officials across the state were asking questions, sharing resources, and using this platform to meet their immediate needs. If we extended this a little bit farther, you would also see an uptick actually after the 2022 cycle and in the early days of 23, as municipals were actually onboarding new staff and making sure that the next generation of clerks and staff were ready for what's to come. Last, before passing the baton, I'll just share that our vision here is to really support and empower election officials as they uphold the democratic process. Our hope is that we're not just connecting folks within state lines, but across state lines, because we know how hard the job is. And we know that any tool that can save you time, as the rest of the panelists will tell you about, is something that's worthwhile. So it's not just this generation of election officials that we're looking to serve, but also the next in helping them build institutional knowledge and get the work done.
Great. Thanks a lot, Austin. And before I turn it over to Avery, I just want to remind folks that if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. We'll hold on to those to the end. But please register your questions now, and we'll circle back to everybody later on. Avery.
Thanks, Charles. Let me just share my screen 1 second. And is it working? Can you see it? Perfect. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Charles, and thank you, Leah and Mara, for organizing this event and for inviting us to participate in it. As Charles said, I'm Avery Davis Roberts. I'm an associate director in the democracy program at the Carter Center. And for those of you who may not be familiar with the Carter Center, we are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization based in Atlanta, Georgia. That was founded by former President Jimmy Carter and Mrs. Rosalind Carter, about 40 years ago, when, as President Carter likes to say, he was fired from his previous job of being president. And so we have, for the last several decades, really been focused on providing support to democracy and elections around the world. In 2020, we started working in the United States. and have been really trying to do a number of things. And the things that I will be talking about today are really how we have been trying to provide more support for mental health and wellness among our election official community. One of the things that is a little bit unusual, I think, about the Carter Center, maybe in comparison to other organizations, is that we don't just focus on one thing. We have our elections team, of which I'm a part, but we also have a mental health program that has been working on promoting a good mental health policy in the United States for decades now, and has really been focused on sort of how can we support people remove the stigma associated with talking about our mental health needs and trying to make mental health something that is equal to physical health when we are thinking about sort of people as whole and holistic beings. So we started thinking more about mental health and wellness for election officials in 2021. It was really sparked by a number of conversations that I had speaking with local election officials, state election officials, just about what their experience had been. And when I asked the question of sort of, how are you? People told me how they were, and it wasn't good. Honestly, a lot of people just asking that question, you could see that it was causing an emotional response. People would start crying, honestly, immediately when that question was asked. And so I thought, well, maybe something we could do is bring together our elections expertise, our sort of connection to the election official community with our colleagues in the mental health program, and we could create this wellness guide just to give some tips and resources to election officials that they could use. A lot of people, when I spoke to them, were responding to the threats and harassment that we all, know about. Many people on this call have probably experienced directly, or know people that have experienced it. We also recognize that it's just a really hard job to be an election official. It's hard to be a public servant in general. The burnout rates among public servants is higher than their private sector counterparts. It's just a really hard job. And burnout, is a real thing. It has a real impact on people. And kind of going back to Austin's points about retention, it's not just about, you as an individual, but it's also about sort of retention, staff retention, and how do we ensure that we are able to have ongoing benefit from the ongoing engagement of our election officials when they're working in such hard circumstances. So we created this wellness guide to really try and respond to issues around trauma, around, people's needs in this very difficult, specific environment that we're working in now, but also just the ongoing challenges of dealing with trauma. So just to quickly give you a sense of what the guide includes, it does include information on the signs and impacts of trauma. It might help you to recognize things that you have been experiencing as trauma, or what you might be seeing in colleagues, so that you can sort of put a name to what it is and understand more about how trauma affects everyone completely differently. It includes techniques for promoting resiliency and recovery. So there's some really practical tips on sort of how you can support yourself, but also support others in your team. It also provides a number of links and resources so that you can get help that is near you. We wanted to make sure that we were providing very practical tools so that people could get help in their geography, not calling somebody, if you're in Rhode Island, not calling somebody in California, but finding somebody that can help you immediately if you need it. And finally, there are also tips and resources for promoting your own and others' physical and online security. So we tried to have it be a pretty holistic guide that includes a lot of resources that cover a lot of topics that are particularly relevant to the community right now. You can find this on the Carter Center's website. There's also a checklist to sort of help if you just need something quick. We know election officials love checklists, a checklist of some tips to take care of yourself, but also to take care of others. You can find that on our website. This QR code will send you directly there if you'd like to download the guide. You can email me directly. One of the things that we have been doing for the last 2 years is just talking about this, providing spaces for people to talk about their experience, and really trying to reach as many election officials across the country as possible. We have been giving talks to the state level, to local county groups of election officials, to national associations. So if there's something that we can do to help to sort of provide and raise more awareness about these issues for you or your team, please do not hesitate to reach out. We would be happy to help. And with that, I will stop sharing and hand over back to you, Charles.
Great, thanks a lot, Avery. That was really great. As somebody who spent the first week of his life in Atlanta and went to Emory, I'm always happy to see the Carter Center represented on these panels. We'll turn it over now to Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Charles, for hosting the panel, and thanks to Mara and Leah for organizing everything. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Steve Wanzik. I'm the executive director of a 501c3 called Protect Our Election, and I am also going to do the share my screen dance. So give me one moment here. Is that appearing for everybody? All right. So Protect Our Election is, as I said, a 501c3, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that I founded in early 2020 with a specific focus on the role that local election officials play in our decentralized democracy. In those heady days, February, March of 2020, it felt like an overlooked part of the system. Certainly that has changed. A lot of that has changed in the last 3 years. But ultimately, I dove into this work with about 15 years of experience in the private sector in digital marketing. And it felt like a lot of what we've talked about, some of the earlier panels today, falls into the bucket of persuasion, right? I think that's the challenge that election officials are facing when they think about things like disinformation. How do we activate people to come out and support democracy and really understand how the process works and value that process? The work that I did leading up to Protect Our Election, covered things like search engine optimization and digital ads and social media. And so I grew a little cynical in that private sector world about how every company in America uses these tools to win customers, but a lot of our, public sector, public advocates and public employees, like local election officials, were being left behind. And I think that's certainly due to resources. It is due to expertise, because this wasn't necessarily part of the job description when people signed up for this work. And so there was an increasing gap that led to this wild imbalance where, I think election officials are trying to put forth the truth, and there's this organized flood of disinformation that really feels like a challenging uphill battle. And so since 2020, we have evolved along two parallel paths. One is where we're supporting election officials who are just trying to do their job the right way by providing some of those digital tools and resources that they might otherwise lack, particularly in smaller counties and municipalities. We've also engaged in assessing the risk posed by the disinformation that we see and the quote unquote election infiltrators who are trying to get into the system now and kind of create chaos from the inside. Today, we're talking a little bit more about the first point, which is supporting the officials and the tools and services that we are here to offer. First, one more slide about a little of the work that we have done to date. When we began in 2020, we spun up a petition. We drafted a petition that we rallied support behind and got about 25 larger organizations to get on board and sign that. And it really went back to some of the values that Julie Wise mentioned in one of the earlier panels today of transparency, bipartisanship, and professionality, really just underscoring that that's such an important part of election administration and making sure that the public understands and knows about that. We, as one early example of trying to bring some digital marketing tactics to this world, we did some outreach and made it easy for people to just one click, take action and engage with their local election officials. We offered a way for people to send a message of support and thanks. We generated about 16,000 of those contacts between voters and their local election officials. The idea there was, particularly leading up to 2020, it felt so much like election officials at the local level were left stranded on an island, and the only thing they were hearing was conspiracy theories from angry people. And so we wanted to just try to balance that a little bit and really rebuild community and community pride in how elections are run in this country at every state and every level. Post the 2020 election, and then again, post 2022, we've conducted nationwide surveys of local election officials to get their perspective. So we've got some interesting data there that we've discussed with Mara and Leah over the years, and we'll have an update on what we've learned this year coming out in the next few weeks. And we also put together a post-election thank you campaign to continue building that sense of community, where we presented election officials and poll workers. So, even the temporary poll workers who get out and do such important work on election day, with a little, like a challenge pin that we teamed up with a partner, and we wound up distributing about 3,000 of those around the country, just again to build that pride. People can walk through their community, and their neighbors will see, hey, this is someone that actually participated in running our election. There's a real face here. This isn't something to be afraid of. A project that we engaged in last year, I know that Mara did similar research, and so we've compared data here, but we looked at 4,000 local election offices around the country and wanted to assess how active and present they were on social media. So this is kind of leading in to the next slide, which is about the services that we're offering today. And we found that about 33% of all offices had a Facebook page, less than 10% had a Twitter account. And of those accounts, less than half of them were verified. And so the social landscape has changed a little bit with the road that Twitter has gone down. Our initial hope with gathering this data was that we would take it to Twitter. We had a contact in-house there who led their public trust team, and we were going to try to advocate for every local election office with an account to get the blue check mark back when that meant something. And that has hit a dead end now on Twitter. And so I think, like lots of folks, there's a little bit of uncertainty with where exactly and on what channels, some of these battles will continue to be fought going forward, and that is evolving. It was wonderful to hear Brianna say that they've got a TikTok account in Boone County, and so just staying on top of what those options are is enough to keep us interested for the next several years for sure. The one point here that I think I want to stress is the second from the bottom there, where conspiracy theory content receives on average 8 to 10 times more impressions than posts from official sources. I think that speaks to a few items of concern, and it came up on a couple of the panels earlier today, I think, which is, what is the best way to engage with conspiracy theories and some of the nonsense that gets spread? And I tend to come from the perspective that, I grew up, and I'm sure everyone else on this webinar grew up thinking that don't dignify a conspiracy theory with a response. You're sort of giving it oxygen. I think that in the last decade, that has changed with the way things can spread so rapidly on social media. Someone mentioned earlier the passive reader, the passive audience who you don't even necessarily know saw it. They didn't comment, they didn't re-share it, but that person might read that, and without any rebuttal, that's the only message that they're digesting that day. So I think it has become increasingly important to not engage with conspiracy theory content, but push back on it. And I think what Dustin mentioned in the last panel is what I mean by that. Put out one response, clarify it, say, nope, this is the truth, and then don't get into a back and forth war with the trolls. I think it can also take the form of not necessarily responding to the conspiracy theory, but if you know that there's something swirling about out there, just put it forth on your own channels, your own social, your own website, and then do what you can to amplify it. And so that takes us to the final slide here, which is the pro bono services that we do offer. We've worked with election officials now on this for the last 18 months or so, and our goal is to help as many folks as possible in the lead up to 2024. We have 3 distinct services that we offer, and we can provide all 3 or only one if only one is of interest. The first is a social media listening report. So for those of you who don't necessarily have the time or the money to invest in a really robust way to track the conversations that are happening on social media, we have set that up and we can share that information with you. We can customize it as needed or just sort of keep it top level. But the value here is knowing, if you start to see or hear people in the community talking about, the latest crazy theory that came from the right-wing ecosystem, what our report does is give you some of the background on where that started, why it has taken off, who is spreading it, and the best ways to rebut it. So I think that can be a potentially useful way to, in maybe 5 or 10 minutes, it's designed to try to be easily digestible, something that doesn't take up a huge chunk of your time, because we all know that election officials have many other things that they need to do in any given day. So the goal here is to limit the amount of time that needs to go into this by making it pretty easy to glance at and get the background that you need. The second thing is a real world threat assessment. So we've got partners who can look at some of the fringier online communities where chatter might be reaching a boiling point and spilling over to real world violence or threats or intimidation. And so that's something that we can put on your radar. It is a little sobering to read through from time to time, but it's the kind of report that law enforcement gets from the FBI, but there's no entity, as far as I'm aware, providing this widely to election officials. And I think that's certainly something that I would hope would change in the future. And then the third item related to threats is a personal data protection program where we are able to offer this for free to any election official who is concerned about their personal data being available online. And so there are countless data broker websites where all of this information is made available for someone who wants to pay like $5. Sometimes it's even for free. And they can find your home address and your home phone number and your relatives and things like that. And so, I think this ties in nicely. Avery and I have had conversations about how this could be great for mental health. And so I think this is a nice complement to the work that they're doing at the Carter Center, and hopefully is something that would be of interest, even if it's just that, even if it's just making sure that your home address isn't on the internet. That's something that we would love to help with. And that's my closing slide. Kind of my tagline for the last few years has been democracy needs a marketing department. Every plumber in your hometown does digital marketing. We need to make it so that the election officials are doing it as well.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Steve. And now, Omar, take it away.
Great. Thanks, Charles. And thanks, Mara and Leah, for hosting this and giving us the opportunity to speak and also to hear these other great presentations. I think what I'm going to cover carries on nicely from what we just heard. I'm going to be talking about a product we have called VoterCast. And I'm excited to share that with all of you. But before I do that, let me just say a few words about my organization, Ideas 42. We are a nonpartisan nonprofit that studies and applies insights from how people make decisions to take actions, the psychology behind how we behave on a day-to-day basis and design solutions for good. We work in a lot of different areas, but I lead our civic engagement practice. Specifically, what that means is that we do research, we design solutions, we do experiments, working very closely with election officials, both at the state and local level. We're strong believers that farmers and cowmen should be friends. We also work with other nonprofits in the space, and then do some work direct to voter. And in our work, we've done this for many, many years now. There's this one persistent challenge that keeps on coming up, which is that a lack of clarity around voting suppresses turnout. It's potentially unsurprising to this crowd here, but basically voting is a journey. It's not an action that is made in a moment and easily followed through on, because there are a lot of steps that people need to take to become a voter. And because of that, it's easy for people to fall off along that journey. Either they forgot to do something, or they didn't realize that they had certain options to vote. And that leads us to having a much smaller electorate than we should have based on people's intentions at the outset. There's one study that looked at what lack of voting information and registration information does for people, and it showed that not having good information can lead to an up to 57 percentage point decrease in somebody's likelihood to vote. So this is a big deal that we take very seriously and want to address. And I'll share a case study to show that we can address it, and it does make a difference when we focus on this. So in 2020, we worked really closely with the Secretary of State of California. The state was moving on a very accelerated path to an all vote by mail state because of the pandemic and other reasons. And we helped on a range of things to inform voters and get voters prepared to successfully vote in that election. But one thing that we've wanted to do as well is we noticed that the Secretary of State had 6 million email addresses of California voters, and we thought, well, this is a good avenue for us to communicate important voting information along the whole journey. So we created a very simple email campaign that had one action per email that we wanted voters to take along the way. For example, making sure you're registered properly, having information about when to submit your ballot and how, etc. And what we saw was remarkable to us. We knew this would have an impact. We didn't know the magnitude of it. So one of the first emails we sent was around address verification. Just make sure you have the right address on your registration so that you're going to get your mail ballot in the right place. We saw a 94x increase in address verification week on week. But on top of that, we saw that people went in to verify their address and realized either they weren't registered anymore or weren't registered to begin with. So we also saw an 8x increase in registration, which was remarkable for us. But what we also learned is that it's not just about communicating, it's about communicating well. And this is where good design comes into play. We sent an email around ballot tracking to get people to sign up. We know that if people are able to keep track of their ballot, it increases confidence that their vote is going to get counted. We saw from our emails that we got 250,000 new signups, which is fantastic again from an email. But we all saw something interesting. If we sent different variants, and if we sent our worst performing variant to everybody, which was still well designed, we would have gotten about 137,000 new signups. But our best performing variant would have gotten closer to 400,000. So that was a clear indication to us that there's something about having best practices in play when communicating to voters to make sure that they have the information they need in a way that's salient to them, in a way that's actionable for them to follow through. Now, the next problem presented to us was, okay, we have these great insights. How do we get this out to every election official? We know every jurisdiction has their own rules and requirements, their own election calendars. And it's not easy for us to port over these insights into something that's very actionable for very, very busy election officials. We subsequently put out guides with sample language, with really easy to use checklists that we thought were going to be helpful, and they were to a certain extent, but they still required a lot of work, especially at a time when election officials were particularly busy, and it wasn't translating into something that was actually meaningful on a day-to-day basis. So then we decided to create VoterCast, which uses technology to help solve this problem. What VoterCast does is it allows us to scale best-in-class evidence-based voter outreach. We use databases on jurisdiction information and election calendars to tailor the outreach that we know works, and then provide those to election officials as off-the-shelf content that's available to them at their fingertip so that they can give voters best-in-class support. So just to give you a sense of what this looks like, it's a very simple, free tool for election officials. You log into your platform, you choose the election topic, the outreach topic that you want to reach out to voters about. And then you select the channel through which you want to reach voters. And then you get material that's ready to go, that's tailored to your jurisdiction automatically. You can update the color scheme to make it match your county colors. You can tweak the text in the platform, but it's ready to go whenever you feel like it looks right for you, and then you can download it, you can share it automatically. And basically it gives instant access to professional grade content that's automatically prepared for every jurisdiction in just a few clicks. So that is VoterCast. We piloted this in 2022. We worked really closely with election officials to build a tool that actually means something for them. The pilot went well, but we're rebuilding the site to be even more powerful. It'll be live in September, early September. But if you want to sign up for early access from now, just so you can get that first login, please do so at votercast.com. And if you have questions, you can also email me at omar@ideas42.org. All right, thank you.
Great. Well, thanks to all the panelists for these presentations, and especially thanks for keeping them more or less to time. So we have about 12 minutes or so, maybe a bit longer if our hosts are indulgent, to engage in Q&A. I'm going to start by throwing out a question to all the panelists, and I'm going to actually maybe ask that they answer in reverse order. So Omar, you're gonna be on the hot seat first, and that's to talk a bit about the biggest challenges you have as kind of an outsider coming into the election administration space and trying to be helpful. So Omar.
No, I appreciate that framing of the question, Charles. We are very cognizant that we are outsiders, and we approach this work with humility and try to be as good of partners as possible to election officials when we're building something. What that means is that when we offer some solution, we want it to be almost instantly valuable. So while we are presenting something that has tools and products that allow you to up your game as an election official, if it's not immediately doing something that takes off something off your plate or makes your work easier in some real tangible way, I don't think we're doing our work well. So as we were building VoterCast, we kept on thinking, what is an instant win for an election official when we build this tool? And what we made sure we did was create content on the kind of topics that election officials were saying they want to communicate on or are already communicating on, or are spending a lot of time creating materials for. So by doing it automatically, we hope the second somebody logs in, they find instant value and then can use the extra time and capacity to build a more robust outreach campaign. And that's been the way we've been operating. And I think we've been successful on that front, but we'll continue to challenge ourselves on that.
Steve?
Yeah, I think certainly what Omar outlined is always top of mind for us too, and it's being respectful of the time and the needs of folks on the ground in local election offices. I think what I'd add to the conversation here is a very logistical hurdle, which is that state laws can vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction in terms of what local officials are able to accept. And so we've tried to navigate that as best we can. And just in the wake of 2020, or in the years since, state legislatures have worded things differently from place to place. And in some states, it's cannot accept funds from outside sources. In some places, it's cannot accept gifts. Sometimes it's cannot accept funds specifically for specific uses like purchasing voting machines. So it really is, you got to sort of weed through all of the legal language from state to state. So that's probably been our biggest hurdle in terms of just getting in the door and making sure that it's acceptable to be in that door. So that's my contribution to the discussion.
Thanks. And Avery.
Thanks. I agree completely with Omar and Steve's points. And I guess just kind of thinking specifically about our wellness guide and our work to support wellness and mental health, one of the challenges is just how do we reach as many election officials as possible, right? We know that these are challenges that are facing people who are working in elections at all levels of our sort of election infrastructure, but sometimes it's hard as an organization like the Carter Center to kind of have information get below those top levels, sort of top levels, I guess, at the state level, or even just sort of just county election officials, right? We really want to be able to get down to everyone who is affected by these challenges. And so figuring out how we can make those networks and how we can talk to somebody who'll talk to somebody who'll put us in touch with somebody else so that we can have as wide a reach as possible has been an interesting challenge for us, I would say, and kind of an adventure, circuitous routes.
There you go. And Austin.
Agree wholeheartedly with Avery, Steve, and Omar. What I'll add, which I know is shared among all of the tools and organizations you've heard from, is really knowing and prioritizing the end user, which in this case is across the board local election officials, right? So building tools that are not for voters or funders, but specifically to meet the needs of who we are here to serve. And in doing that, I think what I've looked to prioritize is really proximity, right? Because there's really no substitute for actually getting out into the field and understanding what people are experiencing. Dustin, Brianna, Charles can all attest to this and the work that we've done at Roundtable to actually go to election offices and get in front of folks that are using the tool and really just get their feedback in real time. I'm sure, Omar and others will say the same about the tools they're developing, but there are very few features that cannot be tied explicitly to what, a local or state election official has asked for. So when you think about kind of the primary goal of a tool like Roundtable, which is to save election officials time, it becomes really easy then to make the right choices about what you're building and who you're building for.
Great. So I want to encourage the audience to continue putting questions in the Q&A. A few have come through, and I'm going to direct them to the panelists. And Austin, this is a little bit of ping pong back and forth, but I'm going to start with Austin. A question came in, and I think there's a couple of things. One, just the curiosity when you were showing the engagement pattern. Kind of engagement after the election and kind of what do you think that's about? But then the other question is just about the platform and the value of the platform and how it's used in the between periods when there's not an election but there's still engagement. So what's going on afterwards, and then what's the value in the non-crazy times?
I think the initial hook, as you pointed out, would be the craziness that comes with the deadlines around how cyclic the elections work can be. And to Omar's point earlier, it's really important to solve an immediate and pressing need. So the question we're always asking ourselves and the users that we work with are really around the lines of what keeps you up at night. So understanding the specific pain point is how we cultivate communities of practice that provide immediate value to the locals and states that we've been working with. And what comes with that initial hook is a sense of place and a sense of shared purpose among the communities that we build. And I think that's where a lot of our users who maybe initially might be skeptical of, a tool like this, maybe, used to, texting a clerk from a neighboring county or just calling up directly a representative from the Secretary of State's office, come to see real value in numbers and of investing in that community. Because even in working with veteran clerks and registrars who, for 20, 30 years have been doing things a certain way, I think can all understand the value of preparing the next generation for what's to come. So by investing in kind of the community approach, the platform approach, you're not just saving yourself time and getting your job done, you're also building a foundation for other jurisdictions and, again, the next generation of election officials to learn from. So I think that's where, a lot of the engagement we've seen in between those, boom times come into play.
And are y'all expanding your network and the election officials that y'all are working with?
We are working with a handful of organizations in the nonprofit space and also federal agencies to actually build out national communities for local election officials. And the idea there is we really want to focus on the challenges that cut across county and state lines. We know every state and sometimes every jurisdiction runs their own election, and those locals within your state will always be your first line of defense. But as you've heard just from the last panel, there is plenty to learn from what's going on across the country. And what we're looking to do with trusted partners in the nonprofit and the government space is create communities of practice where you can talk to other peers who are thinking through similar challenges or looking for a common set of resources, which does go a long way in, again, getting the work done and preparing for, the next generation of election officials that will follow.
Great. The next question is for Avery, and actually the one that was put in the Q&A was similar to one that kind of a question that I had in my mind, so I'll kind of meld them. The question that came into the Q&A, this is about noting the Carter Center's well-known work in international elections, and so part of this question is about, is there mental health work going on in other countries? And the question that I would add to that is that kind of how does, to the degree how do the mental health challenges for American elections, the American election officials, relate to what y'all experience or know about with election officials in other countries?
Thanks. It's a great question. So this collaboration between our elections team and our mental health program at the Carter Center around this wellness guide is the first time we have sort of worked at this intersection. And that is in part because I think that the challenges that election officials in the United States are facing, it's unique. We haven't seen this. Hopefully, when I say yet, it's not going to happen in other places. We haven't seen this in other parts of the world, right? I think that there's we haven't seen this sort of scale of harassment and threats against election officials in other places where we have worked. I think when I first started thinking about this, I spoke to a colleague who had 30 years of experience working internationally, and the only place that he could think of where he'd seen similar kinds of threats was Afghanistan. It's just not something that has happened in this way in other places in our experience. But I think it's also, unique here because we ask a lot of our election officials just in general. We run a lot of elections here. We are election happy in a way that isn't really the case in other parts of the world where people vote less frequently. And so just the level of work and the expectation that people can be running an election essentially all of the time with no break is unusual. So the challenges are definitely unique. We have not worked at this intersection before. I think that we see challenges for the public sector in other parts of the world, but it is not quite as focused on those who are administering elections.
Great. Well, we look forward to finding out more in this area. Thanks a lot. Steve, a couple questions were directed to you, and I know that you responded back to the questioner, but I wanted to just throw it open to the entire audience. There are other surveys in the space. You mentioned some survey work that y'all are doing. There's other surveys in the space. Some of it being done at Reed College. There's other big data, national data products like the EAC's EVES data. Can you just say a little bit about kind of contextualize how what you're doing compares, complements, reinforces other kind of other efforts?
Yeah, I've always viewed ours as complementary to the other surveys out there that we can exist alongside. We tend to put a little bit more of a spin on our focus areas, which is the digital communications piece of this. And so we dig, I think, a little bit deeper into that, getting pretty tactical about, what kinds of platforms people are using, where they see the biggest need. One example from our most recent one was, I think, right around 70% of our respondents identified disinformation as a significant challenge, but fewer than 10% of them reported being able to actually take action to combat it. And so that really said, well, here's a place for us to step in and hopefully again fill that gap. So yeah, I think it has helped us hone in on what the services are that we could be most effective offering.
And then how do you sign up for the pro bono service?
Yeah, so if any of these materials will be circulated after the webinar, that might make it easier. But people can reach out to me, steve@protectourelection.com, and I'll answer any questions and take care of getting people set up.
And I'm just looking on my screen and hoping we can maybe stretch this out about another 5 minutes. Is that good? If folks will keep with us.
Yep.
Just couple more questions. One is kind of directed to Omar. It kind of came up during your presentation, and I'm actually going to put a quasi-audience member, former panelist on the spot here, Brianna. She reacted when you were talking about the kind of the problems of confusion induced in the problems when confusion is induced through communication. So Brianna, do you want to articulate on that, on what you were thinking at that point, and see what the panel has to say to react?
Yeah, I mean, I was so glad that came up, because when we go out and we go talk to community groups and people ask us about different aspects of things, and I know that there's ongoing litigation or that there is movement happening about a particular bill, and I can't give a concrete answer, I know that when I say that, people are not going to be interested in turning out, because they're going to see it as an obstacle. They're not going to feel confident enough to go out. And so that's what I tell everybody. So I'm so glad that there is studies to support that. But I would love to hear from anybody that has come up with good strategies for, we're all almost in a election year faced with, well, something is happening that's creating some confusion, and it's not going to be reconciled until really close to the election. So in addition to putting out good information, what happens when that information changes? I love the email approach and things like that, but I would love to hear feedback on creative ways of telling people, hey, this might not be exactly what's going to happen in election time 6 weeks from now, because there's a lawsuit that might stop it from happening, but stay tuned, we'll tell you when everything's been resolved.
Anyone have an answer to that? I see Leah's hand up. I hope it's an answer.
Thank you, Charles. Something that I wanted to share is from what we observed in 2020, specifically in North Carolina. There was a change, and in many states, with mail voting to make it more accessible. There was a change from 2 witnesses to 1 witness, and there was litigation about the curing process and the deadlines. Something that we observed in a state that likes to vote early in person rather than by mail. We did observe that those election officials who would communicate, you only need 1 witness, this is the deadline, this is what to do, now we can resume to curing. They were very transparent, and they were in real time communicating those changes in election policy. They had higher return rates of mail ballots and success rates of mail ballots. So we did observe that. The same with Florida and online voting in 2020 because of COVID and in-person shut down and voter registration drives shut down. The focus on online voter registration as being available and what to do and when to do it, that also increased voter registration rates. And of course, that's contextual because 2020 was about COVID, but we do observe that being on track, and North Carolina does that pretty well. They have press releases from the state that local election officials share. So interventions like that are useful. Although one of the challenges you have been noting is that, what about those who don't use social media? How do you get that information to them if it's not online? And that, I suspect, hopefully news media and local news outlets can be helpful there.
Omar.
Yeah, I just want to build on what Leah said. I mean, that's a fantastic data point to add to what we have been seeing across the country, where if we are able to give voters more consistent and timely information, then the way they think about their participation shifts a bit, which is away from saying, I need to figure out how to vote and I need to make sure I know what I'm doing to make sure I'm prepared, versus I know I will get the information I need to vote successfully when it's necessary. And we've seen time and again that the sort of cognitive load that a voter has to try to figure everything out is offloaded to an election official who communicates consistently, and that helps the voter, first off, reduce the stress they place on themselves to have everything figured out for themselves, but also when information changes, they can trust that that is going to be updated and that information is going to come to them in some meaningful way, so that they will always have the guidance they need to successfully cast the ballot. The other thing is going back to trust and misinformation. You know, we are sort of slowly building the research around this, but the hope is as election officials become more visible and more consistent communicators, then the sort of opacity of how elections are run gets it goes away, and it becomes much clearer for voters that these are run by people in my community that I know and I trust and are communicating to me constantly, so that when mis and disinformation hits their ears or their eyes, it has a harder time finding purchase because it doesn't resonate with what they're seeing. When elections feel like a black box, then any bad actor can come in and control the narrative and change things. So there's obviously work that needs to be done to respond to mis and disinformation, but consistent communication, even if it's changing, can really do a lot of good work to start setting in people's minds that there are people who are running elections and running them well, and they can be trusted.
So I know we're getting to the end of the time together. Mara, are you jumping in on this one, or are you taking it over?
I was just going to affirm everything that Omar was saying. Leah and I tend to think a lot about addressing misinformation. It's so important to do that proactive work, to do that inoculative work. I don't know what the catchphrase is, you know, because it's so much easier, as the social scientists around the call know, to bolster one's resilience to misinformation than it is to change minds. And so what Omar is saying is absolutely correct, that consistency in pushing forward with effective messaging, even as things change, is going to be really important. So just wanted to like double affirm that.
So before we sign off, I mean, there was a question about FOIA, and I mean, this is on the one hand a huge topic, and we could probably take this on forever. But it's one that a lot of people are worried about these days, and I'm wondering if any of y'all have run into the FOIA issue. The question was, I think, put in the context of Austin's presentation, of the sharing of, you know, it's basically sharing on social media and the degree to which that would be FOIA-able. And so I'll start with Austin, but if anybody else has thoughts on the matter from your perspective, I think that would be helpful if you can kind of keep it pithy, because it's coming up to the 2 o'clock Eastern time hour.
Yeah, our pithy philosophy on that is it's less what information is shared and more how it is shared. And I think the challenge in the status quo is that there's not a ton of clarity within and across state lines how FOIA actually impacts the way that election officials can communicate. So the real challenge here is less finding ways to work around FOIA, but providing a real sense of security in what you can and cannot say in forums like Roundtable or email, and you know what makes sense to conduct, you know, over the phone or in a conference setting, right? So I think just providing clear rules of the road goes a long way, and also creating environments that actually save agencies time in responding to FOIA requests, right? Because that's just the reality of the world today, and that's, you know, something that the platform is built to do.
Anybody else on that one? And if not, I will turn it back over to Mara and or Leah.
Yeah, we have nothing else to add. I know we've kept you a little bit over time. I'll just finish, and then I'll pass off to Leah to thank our panelists, to everyone who stuck around for the last couple of hours, to our election officials, all of you on the call. We are so appreciative of the work that you do, and we really appreciate your support for our work as well. We think that this effort is so collaborative and wonderful, and it's really just great to bring everyone together. I know I speak for Leah and myself when I say that we are so excited, and another webinar will be happening. It's going to happen again, so please keep your eyes out. Leah, I don't know if you have anything else that you'd like to add before we wrap up.
Just to thank everyone. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, MIT. Thank you, Claire, for putting this all together. And we will follow up with everyone because we want your data, but we also want to collaborate. So thank you, and we appreciate your time today and the audience as well.
Yes. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.